I call the August 23rd, 2022 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, would you please conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega.
Present.
Vice Mayor Tom Durham.
Here.
Council members Tammy Caputi.
Here.
Betty Janik.
Here.
Kathy Littlefield.
Here.
Linda Milhaven.
Here.
And Solange Whitehead.
Here.
City Manager Jim Thompson.
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott.
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews.
Here.
City Auditor Sharon Walker.
Here.
And the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. We have Scottsdale Police Officers Anthony Wells and Sergeant Jeremy Pitt here, as well as firefighter Raul Raul Shoshnik. And let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilwoman Milhaven.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do want to start the evening thanking the Scottsdale Police Force, the fire, Parks and Rec, all the facilities people who answered the call during the monsoon and heavy rains and were able to inform the public as parks and different properties were brought back online. We continue to have our monsoon, so everyone is fully alert. It's important that we do continue to monitor the situation with the Colorado Water Basin and, of course, the delivery of water to the valley. And we'll have some discussion about our water resources later in the program. We do continue to think of the people in Ukraine, and I would ask that we pause in silent reflection as they fight for their independence, freedom, and democracy. Thank you. We'll resume our agenda, which includes public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for anyone to come forward to speak on a non-agendized item, which are within the purview or jurisdiction of City Council. Hearing this for the first time, we are not taking any action on any public comment. Speakers are welcome to take 3 minutes to address the council. We have one request from David Boninger. Please come forward, state your address and so forth. Thank you.
Does my address count in my time limit? Don't worry. My name is David Boninger. I live at 3512 North Chambers Court in Scottsdale, 85251 in Peaceful Valley, and I've been a resident of Scottsdale for 22 years. I want to thank Mayor Ortega and City Council for your responsiveness to my emails. I also want to particularly thank Ben Lane for his assistance along the way, and I want to thank the planning staff who also weighed in with helpful responses. Everyone has really been fabulous in this process. The challenge that our community, Peaceful Valley, faces is the approval by the city of building permits of large two-story homes in our neighborhood where we have explicit restrictions against 2 stories. These large two-story homes will dramatically transform the character of our neighborhood. To be clear, we fully understand that the city has stated that it cannot enforce our restrictions, our CC&Rs, as they are private contracts among the residents themselves. However, even if the city cannot enforce those restrictions, we believe that to best serve your citizens and to maintain the character of the neighborhoods in which your citizens live, the city needs to raise awareness of the legal standing of CC&Rs by incorporating them in the building permitting process. There's an important difference between enforcement, which we understand you're saying you cannot do, and raising awareness, which is what we are asking you to do. Raising awareness of the importance of abiding by CC&Rs gives voice to the will of the residents of Scottsdale who created their CC&Rs in the first place. This is the purpose of the citizen petition that we are presenting to you today. Our petition is signed by 98 Scottsdale citizens from our small, tight-knit community of Peaceful Valley alone. Specifically, we ask for a revision to the City of Scottsdale's application process. We ask that the city require applicants for building permits to, number one, provide a copy of CC&Rs for the neighborhood in which they intend to build, and number two, ask the applicants to sign a declaration that they are not violating those CC&Rs. Or alternatively, if this sits better with City Council legal staff, the city could ask applicants to sign an acknowledgement of the legal standing of the CC&Rs as a binding contract between the residents of the community. In short, we're asking that the city support the will of its citizens to maintain the character of our neighborhoods by raising awareness around the importance of abiding by local restrictions. In supporting this proposal, you'll be giving voice to those citizens, both the citizens who wrote the CC&Rs and the citizens that are here today that live in those communities and value their character as they are. Come visit. Take a look at Peaceful Valley. It's a beautiful community. Large two-story homes are against our local restrictions. They will transform the community. We urge you to take action. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just for the record, the clerk is in receipt of the petition. Council will be taking action on that later in our agenda. Do we have any other requests from the public? Therefore, I will close public comment. Just to let you know that our agenda is posted, and there's an item 14A, which was added to the agenda on the August 18th on short notice, and it requires a separate vote to remain on the agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
So moved.
And second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Please record your vote. Okay, thank you. Unanimous.
Vice Mayor Durham votes yes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Next, we will move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda is items 1 through 14A, and these items are duly posted and are taken as one motion. At this time, we also open for public comment. Anyone who wants to speak on the consent agenda items 1 through 14A. I'm told there are none. However, the council itself may have a question and wish to speak. I see Councilwoman Janik, then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a quick question on number 6, or a request. And that request is, I think this is a great idea with the Service Line Protection Program. Just give us regular updates so we can see how successful it is. And I'm hoping for very big success on it, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Whitehead.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate our staff on moving forward on the solar project at the North Courtyard, so I'm happy to see that on the agenda. Good job.
Thank you. I do not see a hand up from Vice Mayor Durham, so, but he is remote. So at this point, I'm open to a motion. Excuse me. There's no other comment from council on this. Okay. Then at this time, I'm open for a motion to approve consent items 1 through 14A.
So moved.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Please record your vote.
Vice Mayor Durham votes yes.
Thank you. These are unanimous. Next, we'll move on to regular agenda item 15 and 16. Now, we post items and ask that public comment come forward during regular agenda items. However, we do also ask that there should not be outbursts, applause, demonstrations, etc. So I didn't, those are the rules we abide by, and I'm mentioning them now. If there's some water issue you'd really like to clap about, you can wait and do it outside, I guess. But anyway, we are very pleased that to receive public comment when it comes forward. Next, we will go to our updated integrated water resource master plan, and our presenter is Brian Biesmeyer, Water Resources Executive Director. Hello.
Thank you, Mayor. As you mentioned, we have a short presentation for you on our, and I'll say it again, quite the mouthful, Integrated Water Resource Master Plan, or IWRMP. This is in the water industry, and we have huge acronyms, so my apologies as we proceed through. With me tonight, I have Gretchen Baumgardner, Water Policy Manager, as well as Scott Mars, our Engineering and Planning Director, and then George Massey, who's with Carollo Engineers, who helped us prepare this document. And so if you ask me some very difficult questions, I'm liable to punt to one of these three very knowledgeable people. But with that, I'll proceed. So our 2022 Integrated Water Resource Master Plan actually started in 2019. It's about an 18 to 24 month process, and I'll get into some of the details of this. But we also ran into a pandemic, which kind of slowed everything down. And so we are here about a year late on where we'd like to be. But it is a very integrated plan, and it integrates our water resources, our water system, our wastewater system, our reclaim systems, and it uses a common framework to establish growth and planning for these plans. It builds on the 2015 Water Resource Master Plan update, as well as the 2017 and 2021 infrastructure improvement plans. And as you will recall, in 2021, we came to you with the infrastructure improvement plan as part of our impact fee development. And so that's a growth-related infrastructure improvement plan, but it is also done by Carollo and rolled into this study. And then the 2019 Scottsdale Water Strategic Plan. We looked at several challenges we could see. The plan goes out for 35 years, and so through that planning process, we looked at several challenges. One would be increased growth along potential density corridors, the Greater Air Park, Old Town, and the Scottsdale Road, McDowell Road corridor. We looked at the need to expand our treatment capacity and other assets, and then we also looked at water quality and how to continue to provide the appropriate water quality and water treatment. The major components, now this isn't just the chapters, this is the major components of putting this plan together, included a planning framework where we work closely with our planning department, Erin Perot and her staff. We looked at population, water demands, wastewater, and recycled water. And then we also looked at our water resource portfolio. We looked at our water distribution system and did some analysis there. We have over 2,000 miles of water mains. It's quite an elaborate system, and it's an involved process because we look at creating a model of our water distribution system, an actual model that we can use. We have to verify that with actual consumption patterns to ensure that when we add portion to this or upsize portions, they all react as we expect them to do. And the wastewater side, the same way. Wastewater side is actually a little more difficult because we don't have meters everywhere. So we had to go out and put meters in manholes to meter flows to ensure that our model was actually correct. We looked, as I mentioned, about water quality. We also looked at our facilities and had some facility evaluation of our major treatment processes. And then we integrated these all, and the final aspects of it is to put together a long-term asset plan, which I'll brief on a following slide. One of the big concerns is obviously our water, our potable water, our drinking water, and projections for that. And so we divided up, or Corolla divided up the water consumption into 4 major areas. In the south, our southern area, and then the shade corridor are called the central area, as well as our northern, which is in green, and then Desert Mountain, which is in the, I'll call it an orange-brown. And then you can see on this, the red areas, which are the development intensity areas. And then we ran projections, or the consultant ran projections on a baseline basis, then an adjusted projection. The baseline was basically following our current zoning and master plan and using the same water demand projections for those same zoning classifications that exist, and then projecting that using MAG data on our build-out to see what the final demands would be on our system, at least build out through 2055. And then we looked at the adjusted projection, which is intense building in those 3 areas that I mentioned. And so that intense building would be, really equates to about a 6 to 9 story, so very massive, dense building in those 3 areas. And that's the blue projection you can see on this graph, and then what that demand would be at build out. And then you'll see some dashed lines, and those dashed lines are really, we wanted to have a conservation, we wanted to imply that we would improve and put conservation to work. And so we did a rather conservative look at conservation. And so this projection for conservation is only a very small amount of conservation. It's 0.25% per year for the first 10 years, and then 0.25 every 5 years thereafter. And if I could get the Elmo going. Little to try to make it a little more clear. So really overall, through that whole 35-year period, it's only roughly a 4% conservation change. But you can see on that graph, it's a substantial amount. I personally think we can do better. We've actually asked our folks to save 5% this year alone. So the potential for conservation and the impact to our long-term consumption patterns are there. You can see it in this small conservation effort, but I wanted to make sure that you understood what the conservation and assumptions were. Back to the slides, if I could. And on the wastewater side, we did a similar analysis. It's divided up into a little differently because we have actually drainage areas where we collect wastewater. In the northern area, you can see it all kind of drains straight down to the water campus. In the southern areas, we pump that north, except for the very south part of the city where we actually send it to our Schrog partners. We also wanted to look at drought and do some assumptions on drought. Now, these assumptions were made, again, this is a 3-year process. These assumptions were made over a year ago, and they don't reflect the current situation, but I think they do lead to some insight about what drought does and how our resources are situated to respond to that. So we looked at our drought management plan and two stages of a drought management plan. Not, to be clear, not the drought contingency plan, which the Bureau of Reclamation just announced. So it's different. It's our city drought management plan. And I've got an Elmo graphic to show. So we looked at both the CAP system and the SRP system as each individually could be hit by a drought and at those particular stages. It's not quite an apple-to-apple comparison. But to be clear, as we look at this CAP system, so as we look at this, you can see on stage 2 of our drought management plan, that really equates to tier 2B. And we're really, right now, we're currently in tier 2A. So it's a step up from where we are. And then stage 3 is really equivalent to a tier 3 in the drought contingency plan. I realize it's confusing, and again, as I stated from the beginning, we use a lot of acronyms and we have different names for things. But that's what we looked at, or I should say our consultant looked at as we went through this planning process.
And Mr. Biesmeyer, that's per year, correct?
That's per
As
year.
long as that were 2A or 2B is in effect, that would be the yearly result.
That's correct, Mayor. You're exactly right. And then we looked at SRP, again, also in those stage 2 and stage 3. And so it's a much higher percentage with these cuts because our SRP allocation is much smaller. So it's not quite an apple-to-apple comparison. And I have to state that the SRP system has shown to be much more resilient than the Colorado system over the life of the SRP system. But these are the two different scenarios that you can see that we looked at. So if I go back to the slides, please.
Again, Mr. Biesmeyer, just to clarify that the SRP includes the water table potential augmentation, or?
It does, and
So
we'll go
that's
through this.
part of the resiliency.
That is,
see that.
Yes, Mayor, you're exactly correct. They have the resiliency of using stored groundwater to supplement their system and do that regularly when they get into a drought scenario. So conclusions, when we looked at the CAP supply shortage, stage 2, so that equivalent to a DCP 2B, our cap supplies are sufficient. If conservation assumptions hold, our cap supply is sufficient to meet us through the 2055, through the extent of the plan at a stage 2 of our drought management plan. With a stage 3 and a severe shortage, our cap supplies would only be sufficient to handle growth through 2035. Let me go backwards if I may. Yep, there we go. So you can see 2035 there is kind of in the middle of the graph, and you use the conservation, so that dashed orange line at the bottom. It's saying that with this stage 3, with our cap supplies, that would be where our water supply and demand would be maxed out. I'll go back. And on the SRP system, with a moderate shortage, SRP supplies would be sufficient. They would pump more groundwater, and we would pump more from our remediated groundwater as well. At a stage 3, SRP would be required to basically supplement all their surface water with groundwater, or sufficient enough to meet our demands. It's a big pull on their system. Again, it's not an apple-to-apple comparison. This is a huge drought on the SRP system, one that we've never seen. But we did ask for that analysis, and our consultant complied and gave it to us. And I'll move forward.
On that clarification, though, at one point 22 years ago, SRP reservoirs were only about 12%. So at that point, I was in office too, by the way, but we saw that the SRP alarms were going off, or the Salt River Project upflow, snowmelt, whatever you want to say, was really in trouble. However, at that time, 22 years ago, the Colorado Basin was filled to the brim. So they were in opposites, and the CAP at that time complemented the growth that occurred for the last 22 years, but it's been declining. The CAP, or Colorado Basin, has been declining to the degree that we see today, right? Okay.
Yes, Mayor, you're exactly right. And that's the advantage of having two separate surface water systems, is they don't normally parallel themselves, and they've been able to back each other up from time to time. So the final slide I have is really about our water and wastewater infrastructure, because we use the master plan to plan out our infrastructure needs, both in growth and to maintain our current infrastructure. And so this is a 35-year plan, and the capital investment that was shown here is $578 million, again, over 35 years. Given the fact that our current infrastructure is over $2 billion, while it is a tremendous amount, in retrospect to what we currently have, I think over a 35-year spend, it's not out of the ordinary. But we do look at this every year, so it's only a planning document, and then every year we come to council with a CIP plan. And we don't just put this in, we look at our current needs and what's happening. And this plan, again, was not developed with the current drought in mind. And so I've circled a couple things that I believe we'll see occur as we come to you next year with our CIP. The first one would be on our water treatment. So you'll see in 2025 a $50 million investment. That would be the expansion of our CAP water treatment plant. Seems little need to be expanding our CAP water treatment plant when our CAP sources are tremendously reduced. So that one would go to the out years and would only come back in should there be some other water source to back up the CAP that's provided. At the same time, we would most likely accelerate our wastewater treatment plant expansion. We plan on putting in a 6th pump back to pump more wastewater back to our water campus. And as we pump more there, we're going to need more treatment capacity at the water campus. And so that would potentially slides that $5 million on the wastewater side forward. That is only the expansion of our rec plant, not our advanced water treatment facility, which that's the only place where we would need it. We have sufficient capacity at our advanced water treatment facility. But so those are two things that you should be prepared to see when we come forward in the spring with our capital improvement plan that won't match this plan, again, because we look every year at our capital and make plans accordingly. So with that, staff's recommendation is adoption of Resolution 12582, authorizing acceptance of the updated integrated water resource master plan. But of course, that's all subject to your questions and your action.
Good. I do have a question, and others can request as well. So there's a third source of our water portfolio, correct?
There are two other sources of our water portfolio.
So
yes, sir.
The other two sources are the underground and the recycling, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How do those factor into, you've calculated those in the graph, saying that we're...
Those are in the potable water, and those are all in those projections. So those are integrated in there. Right now, what we do with our wastewater, as you know, is we take our wastewater, we treat it. That water that we don't use directly for irrigation purposes, we treat to advanced water treatment standards for drinking water standards, and then we inject that into our aquifer. And then we can then use that, pull that out from wells to use that on the drinking water side. So as those wastewater grows, we can recycle more, and that can help us sustain water consumption for a longer period of time. And then as you mentioned groundwater, we have a groundwater allocation because the groundwater table does do some natural recharge, and we have a groundwater allocation. Additionally, we treat water from the North Indian Bend Wash Superfund site, completely remove all the contaminants, and we use that water as well.
Okay, so we have a water bank. And that water bank, should have a policy, should it not, on like how much we would withdraw? If you could explain, how we make regular deposits and then into that water bank, and then do we have a policy, strategic policy for, how to withdraw money, like you'd have a savings account if you lost your job or whatever?
Yes, Mary, great question. So we do put water, so when we have excess CAP water, we treat it at our CAP water treatment plant and we inject it back, that also into our aquifer, and if we have additional water, then we use some regional recharge facilities. Always our preference, our policy is to recharge that water in our aquifer so we can use that later. We use groundwater only in the amount that we have it. We try to meet safe yield, meaning we don't drain that aquifer. We keep that aquifer where it's at. We do have a huge bank of over 200,000 acre-feet in excess of that we've stored up over time, and that would be what we could use in a drought scenario. We would use that as a last measure because it's a bank account. It's a finite resource. We keep putting money in. We do that, but in a severe drought scenario, we would use that as a measure of last resort.
Okay, I see Councilwoman Janik and Councilwoman Whitehead. So, Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brian. Very nice presentation. And I do have quite a few questions. First of all, slide 10, stage 3 severe shortage. You said we can handle growth through 2035. Can we continue to cover the needs of our citizens beyond 2035? Or is it's just a growth factor? Or?
I think the assumption is growth would stop in 2035?
Yes.
And then we could handle our current citizens at that point forward.
Okay, thank you. Then I just want to say I would like to see a component for all development to include the amount of water they intend to use or plan to use so that we can make sure that everybody's doing the best job they can with conservation. And then I have a question on slide 12. Water basin number 6, how quickly can that come online? And are we already making plans to develop that?
We have it in the budget currently to purchase that land this year, and then we would follow up with design and construction after that. It's at least a 3-year process.
Okay.
Because it's a big infrastructure.
Sure. And how much water would that provide as a percentage? What additional water?
Well, as a percentage, I don't know. It's about, so what we treat it, it could be up to 4 million gallons a day.
Okay.
So our water reclamation facility is able to treat 24 million gallons a day. So it's a significant increase to our water campus rec facility.
That's good news. Do you prioritize, you mentioned the one that will drop back would be the expansion because there's less water, and then you mentioned you'd accelerate wastewater treatment. Do you have rankings for the other ones, or does it just pretty much depend upon what's going on?
The rest of that really depends on growth and other things. Part of this is in the infrastructure improvement plan, the 2021 IIP. So of that $578 million, $290 million are the IIP projects or growth-related projects paid for by impact fees. Obviously, if growth is not happening, that's not happening, those things get pushed out.
Okay, okay. Let's see. We may, in fact, slip into Tier 4. Do you want to even guess how much more limited the growth would be, or would you prefer not to comment on that?
I don't really know the exact details of that, and I think we'd best at looking at that in more detail. I can tell you at a Tier 4 and today, we can meet demand. I can tell you.
Oh, good, okay.
We have been, because again, as I mentioned, so the Bureau came out with their announcement of a Tier 2A shortage, but they've also stated they want more water saved behind the dam. And they haven't come out with their means to do so. They've asked the basin states to negotiate. That negotiation didn't go as well as they wanted it to. And so we're left with the Bureau going to make some announcement at some time to tell us there's going to be something else happening.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that's about all I can say. The Bureau's going to make an announcement in some time, and something else is going to happen. I don't know what that is, and I hate to speculate on what that is, but I can tell you, we looked at, could we run at half our cap allocation? Could we actually operate our system and do that? Because we had plans to do that, but we never operated that way. Right now, today, our CAP water treatment plant is running at about 25 million gallons a day. Its capacity is 70 million gallons a day. Okay. So we've been able to run through the month of August, making up for that water with our well field. Now, again, we will back off that after the end of August because it's really just an operational check. But we have been successful at doing that.
Okay, then one last question. Has there been any trending in the SRP water supply? You mentioned that in the past it was not in great shape, and then CAP came on board, and now we've got CAP not in great shape, but SRP seems pretty good. Do you see any trends over the past couple years that we have reduced water, or is it still in pretty good shape?
It's still in pretty good shape, and it's been responding. It's interesting, and don't have everybody from CAP here to talk about it. They certainly obviously know their system much better than I do, but it has been, because our monsoons have actually been so heavy, they've actually seen storage during the monsoons, which is a rare thing. They have not generally seen that, but our heavy monsoons actually have started to have some impact on their storage. So that's a good thing.
Good, that's great. And then on the conservation side of it, how has it gone with the trade out of grass to artificial turf?
Thank you, that's a great question. Our turf rebate program is off the charts. Matter of fact, staff came to me and asked if we could increase our budget, or what happens if we exceed the budget on the conservation side. I told them, keep the program running, keep accepting those, and if it gets really bad, I'll come to you. But I think it's a great program. We've got tons of people. Our staff are just, they're working, you know, constantly. And there's tons of folks that have been both for the turf rebates, like we've never seen before. I think it's helped that we've increased our turf rebate amount to $2, so we're the leader in the valley on giving $2 per square foot, giving money back. But I also think because we've been trying to notify people and they know what's going on, a lot of folks have come on board, including some major HOAs. And that's an awesome thing to see the HOAs because they have a lot of water that they use. So that program is going great. So as our home inspection, our home audits, those programs are going off the chart, and we can't keep up with them. So both those programs are really taking off, and we can see the response in our customer base, and appreciate that.
Okay, that's exceptionally good news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Whitehead?
Okay, thank you. A lot of those questions were my questions too, so thanks, Councilwoman Janik. So I guess we could say there's a silver lining. Everybody's always looking for that silver lining. So we have a trifecta of outcomes to this drought, which I read repeatedly is not a drought. It's a new normal. It's part of climate change. It's part of the heat increases that we're experiencing. So this is just the reality. And the trifecta is that our residents, having just come off the campaign trail, I can tell you with certainty our residents want to restore a more a lower density, lower intensity growth, and it looks like that will help us meet our water needs. We have a desire to have lower bills. We've had a lot of increases, so the lower water usage will lower people's water bills. And then with all these programs, we'll do more with less. So I think there's just a lot of possibilities with this to just be innovative and better and really live more sustainably in our beautiful Sonoran Desert. But that said, I wonder if you can talk about the percentage of water from the CAP versus the percent used SRP. I don't think they're quite interchangeable. It's not like we can switch.
They're not, and as I mentioned, this really wasn't an apple-to-apple comparison. So our SRP allocation is really about 20% of our water supply compared to the CAP, which is a much higher percentage. So yeah, it's not the same, but it is a valuable portion of our.
It's a valuable portion, but it's not as if the SRP water can replace, for instance, water that we're using to provide services up north.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, SRP water is only allowed to be used on Salt River Project lands, which is really basically in Scottsdale south of the Arizona Canal. So there's a limit. We do have some other resources from, quote, SRP, such as new conservation space. So the city wisely invested in the raising of Roosevelt Dam a number of years ago. So excess water, when it's stored there, is called NCS water, and we can use that NCS water to pump north. So we do have some water to pump north, but not generally the full allocation. It's a limited and a time dependent on the SRP system of how much of that water we have at any time and how much we can push north.
And roughly what percentage of Scottsdale's water is SRP versus all the other sources, CAP or
I believe it's a 20%.
20%? Okay.
25 is,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 15? I'm not reading my hand
15.
signals very well.
15, okay. I'm really, and I thought there was a chart that showed the dollars we need to invest in our growth areas. I can't seem to find that. Was there a chart that showed we have a lot of infrastructure needs in the areas that we did experience a lot of growth? Is that a chart, or did
Well,
I
I
see
know,
somewhere?
just in the, like I said, the IIP, so I'm not sure
That's okay.
if you have a, no.
Okay, so
I
on
don't
the,
have that on,
that's fine. I mean, clearly, we have a lot of infrastructure needs, and you point those out. The one you point out on this particular chart is to increase the wastewater to our plant off of Pima. Is that, can you get into a little more detail about that? How far south will we be pumping? Currently, we cannot pump our wastewater north of about Doubletree, is that correct?
that's correct. I don't know if you can really see it here, but there's two blue dots, and I'll try to put the cursor around there. Those are our southernmost pump back stations. So that's the limit of where we can take water and push it north from those pump back stations. Basically, it's around Via Linda north. What we're planning on that further pump back station down around Indian Bend, so we're going to drop back deeper into the southern section to pull that water from.
Okay, so we'll still have plenty of the south that we're not pumping north to our treatment.
The goal is to meet the minimum SROG commitment we have. Every other drop, we pump north.
Correct. Okay, very good. And so is there, this is kind of a valley-wide question. We are producing drinking water here in Scottsdale. Are there any plans in other cities to build facilities like ours so that we overall increase the amount of potable water being produced in the valley?
Thank you, Councilwoman. That's a great question. And yes, I know the City of Phoenix is looking very hard at doing direct potable reuse. We are too. There's a statement in here that we can, at our water campus, it's a pretty simple connection to do direct potable reuse. We already produce the water of that quality. We would just pipe it over to our surface water treatment plant and be able to do that. The regulations have to change, though. So there's a phase 2 of the direct potable reuse rules that are in process now with the Department of Environmental Quality, but they need to be finalized, and the projection is around 2024 is their goal to have those second phase of regulation. Which would allow us to do more than our demonstration project right now. The current regs will allow us to basically do our demonstration project, but they don't really allow for a larger project, and we expect in 2024 to have that regulation in place. And yes, we have a pilot study that we will be seeing in our capital improvement plan to look at what it would take and to do some piloting of that water. It's very pure water. The problem is it's actually so pure when you put it in a drinking water treatment plant, it doesn't treat the same way as other water. So we're gonna have to look at that and figure out where we connect it and what the best connection is without disturbing our current treatment process. But yes, we are looking at that. City of Phoenix is looking at that. I know the City of Goodyear is very much interested in it as well. So I think the race is on who's going to do direct potable reuse first. I would bet on us.
Yeah, because we have the plant. I mean, none of these other cities have to build the treatment facility first, correct? I mean, there's no...
That is correct.
Yeah, so well, I'm excited, and it's a race we want everybody to win in. So there is no losers here if we can get it done. Finally, I just want to bring up another source of water that happens to be one of my favorites, and that's the water we're losing right now to the 5,000, 4,000 homes that are on septic. So I'm excited about that. Once we do some septic to sewer conversions, we're going to have a new source of water. Is that correct?
That is correct, and you asked me a while back on what that volume would be, and it's about 800,000 gallons, so close to 1 million gallons a day if we could get everybody off of septic. So that is another source of water. In our 2021 IIP, as part of that, we plan on putting some infrastructure into those septic areas to facilitate more connections. And so we have a strategic plan to advance into those areas and make those connections easier for folks. We will also continue to look at grants and other things that we could do to accelerate that process.
Okay, thank you. I will say that the audit is well worth doing. I had my own water audit today. Really excellent program. We're targeting the big users because that's where we can get the most bang for the buck. But boy, having our incredible staff out there helping the little users who should be a lot littler users is really amazing. It's an amazing service, and I'm really pleased with. I was pleased with the audit. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Millhaven.
Thank you. So the conversation of water almost always includes a conversation of development, as we've already seen here tonight. Councilmember Janik talked about water studies being required for developers, but I know we already, excuse me, require quite a bit. So I apologize if this question's better suited for planning staff, which means you can punt to them if you'd like to. But could you sort of give a summary of when, and because I also know we put in some new guidelines recently about certain sizes of developments and water usage and things that were required. Could you give us sort of an overview of when a new development comes forward, the things that the city asks of them in terms of water and wastewater?
Councilwoman Millhaven, yes, we have put in part of our sustainable water management principles, a principle 4, which for large developments requires them to look at their total water consumption, look at their net water usage, so how much wastewater is coming back to us, put in additional conservation measures to ensure that they are maximizing the efficiency of the water that they're going to use, as well as look at that water on a basis of economic value. So what do they actually add to the city of Scottsdale on a per gallon basis? And we're currently working through with Erin and her staff and Rob Millar on how to actually put that model together for you. We have active meetings. We plan to have that this fall to put that together in a means that developers can provide that information to you. It's really devised as a plan to provide that to council as a means to evaluate a large development and what they add to the city.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Caputi, Councilwoman Littlefield afterward.
Mr. Biesmeyer, you mentioned that there's a difference between the drought contingency plan and our own citywide drought management plan. And I know people get confused about this. I get confused about this. Just always trying to get in the center between understanding the great things that we're doing for water and managing people's panic. So when we move in the greater scheme of drought management plan or drought contingency plan, that doesn't always necessarily move us into a more dire situation as a city. I know you were trying to explain that to us in terms of moving from a tier. The state moves from a tier, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we move as a city. And maybe a quick sort of just cheat sheet explanation of that, because I know I get confused.
Councilwoman Caputi, I totally understand, and I tried to do it, but I'll do it again because I do know it is confusing. So this is a page from our drought management plan. Move the mic over a little bit. So on this, you will see that we look at the cap shortages up above, and then our stages here. And so we're currently in Tier 1 this year, and we're in Stage 1 of our drought management plan. The declared tier for next year is 2A, which would keep us in a stage 1 of our drought management plan for next year. Provided that unknown doesn't happen, or again, I don't know what the Bureau's, the other foot that might fall on that, but as we currently stand, we would stay in a stage 1 according to our drought management plan. If we got a tier 2, if additional cuts are made, then that would kick us into a stage 2. And that's where council, stage 2 is where council takes over declarations and gets involved and has to go to council for those declarations. To stage 1, the city manager declared that, but at stage 2, it would take council's declaration. But yes, it is different, and that's where we currently stand at a tier 2A. It's really only, as you can see, it's 1,000 acre feet, 1,100 acre feet more of a cut to us, but we have over around 10,000 acre feet of water that we've been recharging, so we just take that cut out of the recharge. It doesn't impact our delivery to our customers at this point.
Because when you hear those gigantic numbers on a statewide level, it does, people get panicked, and I think it's important to just manage that. You mentioned that we're going to have an infrastructure need of, what is it, 500 million?
578, if we could go back to the slides,
Yeah.
Thank you. 578 million over 35 years.
So can you just explain to me where that comes from? How does the city pay for that infrastructure?
That infrastructure is paid on 2 sources here on this one. One is rates, both water rates and wastewater rates. Each of those are independent funds, and rates are set independently on the water and the wastewater. The other payment includes our impact fees, and so that's designed for development to pay for development. And as I mentioned, 290 million out of that 578 comes from our impact fee funded.
So development pays for development, but growth is going to stop at some point in the future. And we also want water bills to go down. It's just something to think about. The numbers are going to get interesting, I think. So, math.
The numbers will get interesting because a unique feature of when you have less water to deliver through the CEP canal means every gallon or acre foot of water is going to cost a lot more.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of what that shortage does to our wholesale provider and the water that's provided to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for continually updating us. I love that we are looking 35 years out. I think it's super important. And I say it every time we have a water presentation. We don't do things on the council without looking at all of the infrastructure and making sure that we look far enough out to balance all of our needs. So I really appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, a lot of my questions have been answered already, but I did have one or two just kind of off-the-cuff things. Could you give us a very brief, 1 or 2 sentences, update on how Rio Verde is doing? Have they found a source of water? What are they up to now?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I can provide too much information. I know that they have a meeting before the Board of Supervisors to talk about their district. And I believe that is it September, Gretchen? Do you remember the date? I can't remember. They do have a scheduled meeting before the Board of Supervisors to see if they can actually be allowed to form their water district. And I think that's a good first step. But they've also, I know the supervisor's also looking at potential private sources out there. So there's all this still stirring in it, but it hasn't been resolved. It needs to, but it hasn't.
This update, all the stress right now going on with water doesn't help that either.
No, ma'am, it does not.
The other question I had was a little more just kind of weird and off the cuff, but I've gotten a lot of questions from people here in Scottsdale who have swimming pools in their backyard. And they ask me, what can they do to conserve water without having to drain the pool and ruin the concrete and all that kind of stuff? And I've told them, well, you could cover it with plastic. That might help evaporation. But beyond that, I really didn't have any answer. Do you have any answers to those?
My first answer is to call our water conservation folks. And
Okay.
they do have some answers. But you are correct. Pool cover is one of the ways to stop evaporation. But if they'd like to get rid of their pool, we also offer a rebate that will help them eliminate that pool too. So we do have that. But I would call our conservation folks because they're going to know more than I can tell you right here. I do know that a cover is one feature that can be used.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Durham, did you have anything remotely?
No.
Vice Mayor.
No.
Sorry, Vice Mayor. Okay, then I believe everyone has spoken. I'd add a couple more comments just so that I'm clear. First of all, I believe Scottsdale Water is very prepared, and that's exceptional. And we're also very vulnerable. We're vulnerable because of the depletion of the Colorado Basin water. We have a high percentage. If we were only dependent 10% under normal circumstances, we could probably not react as we are today. That vulnerability and whether or not the Bureau would come out with a stronger position that might have pushed us to 2B, even last week, they could have declared that. You saw the statement that AMWA put out today, and you know I sit on representing the city, our meetings on Thursday. And essentially, that statement from AMWA, the Arizona Municipal Water Users Group, was saying that the declaration from the Bureau was not definitive enough, and we will be discussing what local governments can do ourselves. So on one hand, if we have a trend which continues downward and ability perhaps to save less underground because we're receiving less from CAP, we'll find out how much less. Conservation will carry us only so far. And I believe that, and I'm told January is when the spigots get reduced for the big ag and other sectors. But in fact, I believe we should utilize the time that we have between now and January 1st or 2nd, whenever that is. And it's incumbent upon us to, if you know a layoff's coming, right? If you know there's going to be some reductions, and there may be another one in June of 2023, presuming that they expect the lake will be down another 22 feet by July of next year. Those are their projections. So that means that I believe this is, a clear picture. However, we are looking at some scenarios where we can't just dance around it, and our council will be looking at some, ordinance measures. September 13th, we'll be discussing some specifics. Again, if we wait for Big Brother to tell you what's going to happen, or on the other hand, there's only limited water supply. So we always are dealing with the law of scarcity. Development is not infinite, can't go on forever. I think your graph shows that pretty clearly. 2035, which is basically about 10 years away when you look at planning and such. It means that we have a critical apex there. And then the other projections of tier would also, in our drought plan, take us to stage or tier 4. So we have our own responses that the council has to take. I with that, certainly would move to approve the resolution as shown, but saying that this is really just a recognition of what the big picture is, and even when you say our CAP water, we could handle 70 million gallons, but we're only handling 20. Well, it's nice that we have that capacity, but it doesn't mean 3 years from now they'll even be able to give us 40. So we may have a capacity to handle CAP water, but they may not be delivering it. So that's how we have to act, and I appreciate that. With
Mayor.
that, I will ask for that we adopt Resolution number 12582, authorizing acceptance of the updated 2022 Integrated Water Resource Master Plan prepared by Corolla Engineers, Inc.
I'll
So
second
moved.
that.
So moved.
Any other discussion?
Well, I would just like to agree with what the mayor said. I would like to speak to my second, and that is that we're not here to see how much we can get away with. We're here to be conservative and to prepare and to see how much we can do to ensure that the future generation has the quality of life and the water they need. So I appreciate this, and I'm excited about the possibilities of doing far better than we currently are doing with water. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, please record your vote.
Vice Mayor Durham votes yes.
Yes. And again, just to clarify, there was no public comment on that issue. So we will move on to our next regular agenda item, which is the Financial and Capital Improvement Plan, the update, and presenting our treasurer, Sonia Andrews.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. Next slide. Okay, our fiscal year is July through June 30th, and so we're in the process of closing our fiscal year 2022 books. And tonight I have some preliminary results for the general fund to share with you, and we hope that our final fiscal year 2022 financial report will be available in November or December. Next slide. So the city's general fund is the primary operating fund. It's usually our main focus. Our general fund remains very healthy. Overall, the general fund ended the year with a record revenue growth, again, up to 15% over last year and 21% above our budget. And the main reason for this growth is because in fiscal year 2022, we were still experiencing a post-pandemic spending spree and pent-up demand. Consumer spending was very strong across the board, from retail to dining, and I'll show you that later, driving up our sales tax revenues. And, I just wanted to say that we don't expect this kind of double-digit growth to be sustained year over year because it is due to a unique combination of factors, which I'll explain over the next few slides. Typically, our general fund revenues grows about 3 to 6% a year. So having a 15% year-over-year growth is really phenomenal. All right, next slide. This slide shows our sales tax growth by category, retail being our largest category. Consumers during fiscal year 2022 have been buying everything from electronics to home furnishings, and online sales also skyrocketed. The dining and entertainment and hotel-motel categories are mostly driven by our visitors and tourists, and we had very strong tourism activity in fiscal year 2022 as well. Some of this increase in our tax revenue is also due to price inflation. Next slide. So the Phoenix metro area inflation was higher than any other big metro cities last fiscal year, hitting 12.3% in June. Despite the inflation, consumers continue to spend, partly because of low unemployment and wage growth. Wages and salaries grew at a 6.5% pace in the Phoenix area compared to 5.7% nationwide. So those are the reasons some of our consumers were spending. Another reason consumers continued to spend was also consumers had savings to spend. Next slide. During the pandemic, this slide shows the personal savings rate. During the pandemic, the personal savings rate climbed to significantly to almost 35% at one point. So consumers have plenty of money to spend in fiscal year 2022. So with inflation, wage growth, savings, pent-up demand, online sales, those are the unique combination of factors that drove up our sales tax revenues. Okay, next slide. On the expenditure side, we came in under budget overall. inflation was not a big factor for our expenditures in fiscal year 2022 because for a lot of our expenditures, the pricing has been established through the contracts. So when we renew the contracts, we will likely see the inflation being factored in. But for 2022, that was not a huge factor for our operating expenses. On the capital expenditure side, we saw price inflation, but on the operating side, not quite yet. We saw overtime increases because of all the vacancies, and the overtime increases were offset by personnel savings. So you don't see a lot of overage in our budget because of the savings that offset the overtime. Next slide. And this just shows you the expenditures by division. All our divisions came in under budget with the exception of fire, where overtime was slightly higher than budget. And I think next slide, this just summarizes my quick financial update. Basically, we also had some land sale proceeds that provided one-time revenues in the general fund. And next slide. Next slide. And before I end my section, I just wanted to share for the bond 2019 program of the $319 million that was approved by voters. We have spent $53.4 million to date on the, I think there's 58 projects. So with that, I can answer any questions before I turn it over to our city engineer.
Councilwoman Janik?
Just one quick question. The other category on slide 4, I believe it was, can you just give me a rough idea what's in the other? It was 30% over projections, which is very sweet.
A lot of the other categories are computer, software, and hardware, wholesalers, and manufacturers. And there's a lot of miscellaneous items in there, too, that don't fit into those specific. Actually, it's actually the next slide if you, yeah, the next slide. The other, a lot of it is wholesale manufacturers and wholesale wholesalers that don't fit into those other categories.
Okay, thank you.
I would also comment on the construction side there. I'm told that the one-stop's been very busy, and of course those numbers have been holding very strong, which are reflected in the matrix there. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. We'll continue with the CIP picture with our chief city engineer.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So I will be presenting the fiscal year 21-22 CIP quarterly update for the fourth quarter through June 30. I always go the wrong direction on this. Okay, so the agenda tonight is for first reviewing the bond 2019 projects. I'll just go through each question and highlight a project. And then I'll go through other non-bond CIP projects, both in design and under construction. So the first slide here is question 1. Question 1 is Parks, Recreation, and Senior Services, and this highlights the projects that were funded in fiscal year 21-22, and again, this is through the fourth quarter, so future updates will actually have 22-23 projects on them. So a couple things to note here is the first project listed here, number 2, add a splash pad and improve walkways at McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. That design is commencing. That is actually going to be delivered with the bunkhouse replacement at the McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. Another thing to note here is we have number 55, build a 17-acre park at Ashley Hills Drive and 74th Way. That's proceeding in the design process, and we're actually in the municipal use master site plan process. We did just go before a planning commission, and it was continued, so that will be heard again in September. I think we were originally hoping to get to council on that through that process in September, but that will be delayed as well.
And with that slide also, the dog park, item number 42, is progressing at the Thompson Peak off-leash dog park.
Correct. That is under design.
Yeah, we issued the architects a contract, and they'll be
In the spring,
having
yep.
some community outreach.
Correct, yes. Thank you. Okay, the first project here is number 53. It's the build the multi-use sports fields in the area of Bell Road. This, as you know, was two projects. One was the Bell Road Sports Complex and the off-site water at DC Ranch. And then the second phase was the Westworld Sports Complex. So the Bell Road area project, the facilities, the support facilities and restrooms are now complete. And they're working on punch list items at that location. So our primary work right now is at the Westworld Sports Complex, and we're proceeding with storm drain work, sidewalk work, water lines, and we're working on the drainage for Field 5. Okay, question 2 is community spaces and infrastructure. And I will be highlighting, again, the Civic Center project. I think it's a good one to highlight. But I also wanted to point out a couple of other things here. First, we have a couple of projects at Westworld that are proceeding. We have 45, which is renovate the horse barns to increase rentable space. We actually have our first barn is expected to be delivered in October, so that will be installed. And then I have 46, which is replace the public address system at Westworld. And that actually, the installation there is complete, and we're just working on testing and punch list at that location. Okay, here we go. This is the Civic Center project. And this, the intent of this project is to reconstruct the Civic Center to provide better pedestrian flow and permanent performance areas. And I think previous updates have shown a lot of earthwork and grading and utility work, but now we're actually starting to see some vertical structures. We've been doing some tree planting, quite a bit of tree planting. 140 new trees are going in there. We're doing a lot of concrete work over near the Little Red Schoolhouse. The support structure for the 360-degree performance area has been set. And then as you can see in these photos, the shade structure and the restroom building are starting to take shape. Okay, question 3. We have 2 slides for public safety and technology. There's a lot of the IT-related projects that we have, 8, 11, 12, 14. These are all proceeding. Most of these are looking to have a completion date by the end of fiscal year 22-23. Sorry, I keep going the wrong direction. Okay, and then this is question 3 continued, and I'm going to highlight the fire training facility. But also to note here, we have install the bulletproof glass in reception areas of the police department facilities. Construction at the PD headquarters is commencing. There was some delay on this project, both to get the materials, and then some of the materials when we received them were damaged, so had to be replaced. But that is progressing, and following the PD headquarters, we'll be doing the Family Advocacy Center. Now, this is project number 38. It's build a new fire department training facility. This is our new training facility that will be located in Tempe at our Tom Hans facility. It's being delivered in conjunction with the expansion of our police training facility there. And this is a rendering of the proposed fire training facility, and it shows the 3 live fire training structures as well. We're proceeding towards final plans on the fire training facility portion, and our construction manager at risk, Core Construction, they're preparing the GMP for demolition, site work, and long lead materials for that project. So then this slide highlights the projects that are complete. We have several of the court surfacing and lighting projects that were done. We had quite a few that are already complete at Westworld, including lighting and restroom expansion. And then we have several of our automation, power supply, and training software projects that are complete. Okay, other projects in design. I think we did highlight this project several months ago. It's the Scottsdale Road from Joe Max to Dixoletta. This project is to build a minor arterial cross-section, including landscaping, medium bike lanes, sidewalks, and trails. And it will include a roundabout at Scottsdale and Dynamite. It will also eliminate the low-flow crossings. Important to note on this project is it does include quite a bit of ALCP funding, as well as a federal grant. We're working towards 90% design, and we anticipate construction in the fall of 2023. Projects like this, when we have federal funding, a lot of time they take a little bit longer. So we have to go through the federal process. We have to get authorization through Arizona Department of Transportation. We have several clearances that we have to obtain, and a lot of them are dependent on each other. For example, we have to get an environmental clearance for these projects, and we're not able to actually go through our right-of-way acquisition process until we actually have the environmental clearance. And then we have to get right-of-way clearance as well. So there's quite a few steps, and it kind of makes the duration a little bit longer on some of the federal projects. Okay, and other projects in construction, we have the Osborne Road Complete Street, design and construct bike lanes and sidewalk segments along Osborne Road between Hayden and Scottsdale Road. It includes an Indian Bend Wash path connection and a roundabout at Miller and Osborne. So the progress on this project has been sidewalk on the north side of Osborne from Hayden to Osborne Park, working on the retaining wall and path connection to the Indian Bend Wash Trail system. We've done some ITS work. On this project, it's important to note that we are actually doing a water line project in the intersection at the same time. The water department had a need for some of the water lines in the intersection to be replaced in advance of the roundabout construction. They don't want to have to get in there after the fact to have to do any repairs and potentially tear up the roundabout or cause traffic delays in the roundabout. And then this Dove Valley Waterline Replacement Project, this is part of our Water Distribution Systems Improvement Program, and I thought this was a good one to highlight because it was really a fast-track project that we had to do. We found out about it in the fall. There was about 7,000 feet of 12-inch PVC water line that was failing and needed to be replaced with 12-inch ductile iron pipe. We needed to get it designed. We got a construction manager at risk on board to help us with especially the ductile iron pipe supply chain issues. There's long lead, long ordering times for that. So we did get the CMAR under contract in February for the procurement of the pipe, and then we got them under, we authorized their construction contract in April. They began construction in May. They needed to get the segment in front of the Cactus Shadows High School done during the summer months. So they were able actually to get in there starting on May 23rd. They closed the road between 56th Street and 60th, and they were actually able to open the road back up, get the water line installed, the road repaired in time for school opening. The road was opened on July 29th. They're still working on the project, but this was a good segment of it. And I think that's all I have, and I'm open to any questions.
I don't see any hands up. I do want to make one comment, though. I have been asked what is all the road work going on with cable being, or lines being put under along Indian School and so forth, and I don't see them as city projects. So I just want to clarify, if you could just clarify it. Not everything under construction and roadways is the city's are the city's projects, correct?
Yes, Mayor, that's correct. Actually, a lot of times that gets confused with capital projects. Sometimes we are doing capital projects in the area, but a lot of times we have a lot of the private utility companies doing work. Particularly, I think Verizon is doing a lot of fiber work throughout the city right now.
Good. At this point, I would call for any public comment. I see none, I hear none. Therefore, I will close public comment. Okay, do we have any other questions before I request a motion on this item? We're just going to accept, we're just going to accept, although it says there may be a motion, we're just accepting your report? Okay, thank you. Okay, next we'll go to public comment, another opportunity for public to come forth on a subject not on the agenda, and they could speak for 3 minutes. I have no indication for any speakers, therefore I will close the second session of public comment. I want to thank Peaceful Valley for your patience in staying here as we move on to the citizen petition. So we have received the citizen petition signed by about 100 residents and concerned and suggesting some city action. We will see a slide that would allow us to take action on a petition. So our charter calls for council to receive petitions at every meeting and then to direct or give take action on any petition. I will just use my memory until we see the slide, but essentially, okay, here it is. We have 3 choices. Excuse me, go ahead, clerk.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Yes, you have 3 options. You can direct the city manager to agendize the petition for future discussion, direct the city manager to investigate the matter and prepare a written response to the council with a copy to the petitioner, or take no action, and it's now on the screen.
Okay, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thanks, Mayor. I think the most expeditious way to handle this is number 2, which is direct the city manager to investigate the matter. It may be something that can be done administratively and not need a city council meeting. So I would motion to direct the city manager to investigate the matter and prepare a written response to council on this petition.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote.
Vice Mayor Durham votes yes.
Thank you. We've completed that item. And next point on our agenda is if there are any mayor and council items, this is an opportunity for an item to be brought up. I do not see any requests by mayor or council. Therefore, with that, I will adjourn the regular portion of this city council meeting, and we'll be moving on to a work study session. Would you like a 5-minute break? Okay, we will resume at 6:30. Thank you. We will reconvene our regular meeting with a work study. For the record, all our council members are present, as well as charter officers. The purpose of a work study is to review in a more informal setting by work study, and give direction, express our views, so that staff would be able to bring forward subsequent action on any matter. Typically, we always allow public comment on the subject, which has to do with the safety, housing, water resources, energy and environmental elements of the built environment, the architecture we live in, educate, get healthy where we live, play, and earn a living. So at this point, I would ask that we could go right into our public comment, but I would prefer that we would go right to our presentation with Michael Clack, and then after that point, we would have 5 speakers from the public on the posted subject. So good to see you. Mr. Clack is our building code official.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is Michael Clack, and I am the Chief Development Officer for the City of Scottsdale, better known as the building official for the City of Scottsdale. And my role is to enforce the building codes that are adopted by the City of Scottsdale for construction purposes. That's a very broad overview of what I do. Let's see if I can. Good. Okay, so if you follow along on the slide here, just as a matter of background, every 3 to 6 years, building and fire codes are updated to account for changes in national building standards, technologies, and construction practices. They are to ensure the safety of buildings and maintenance of life safety systems. We're able to maintain a favorable rating with the Insurance Services Office for homeowners. Because we try to stay current with our codes, we get more favorable insurance ratings as a result. And part of what we do when we update the codes is to simplify the building compliance by improving code language. Sometimes it gets a little bit unclear as to what the intent is. And so we try to improve the code language from year to year, strive for clarity and ease of use as much as possible. And we do this while addressing energy, environmental impacts, and water conservation measures. The code is also in keeping with the General Plan 2035. And in the building codes, there are elements that we address, such as the safety element, housing element, water resources elements, energy element, and environmental element. So it's not just about construction, but we try to address all of those other items within the codes. And this slide here indicates all the codes that we're going to be bringing forward to you. We hope to bring these codes for formal action by the City Council on September 20th of 2022. And these are all codes that are published by formerly known as the International Conference of Building Officials, ICBO, but now it's called the International Code Council. And on these codes, just to go through it really quickly, we have the International Building Code, the International Fire Code, the International Existing Building Code, the International Plumbing Code, Mechanical Code, Residential Code, the International Fuel and Gas Code, the Green Building Code, that's the LGCC, the Energy Conservation Code, and our Swimming Pool and Spa Code there at the bottom. Just to keep in mind, these codes are not retroactive, so a building that was built in compliance, for example, back in 1972, it does not have to come up to today's code as long as it is maintaining the operation under which it was contemplated. In other words, no change of use, any addition that's done to the building, it has to comply with today's code without necessarily having to upgrade from the previous code under which it was built. Our local amendments reflect environmental conditions and community priorities. And so as we go forward, one of the things that we strive to do is keep in mind the community priorities, and that's the purpose of this work study session, because you're going to see two different recommendations, and both of them have to do with city priorities, and we're looking to the council to give us some direction as to which way we want to go, because ultimately it is up to the council what goes into the codes. This slide here is just a illustration of a code change hearing on a national level. There are code professionals, design professionals, trade organizations, builders, contractors, manufacturers, suppliers, government agencies, architects, engineers, all come and discuss changes to the code. At this particular one, I'm probably way off to the side, so I'm probably not in this picture, but I do have an opportunity to attend the code development hearings and process, and have been active in getting some of the changes into the code. Just to go through some significant changes, starting with the building code, some of the changes has to do with mass wood construction, new roof fire classification for solar photovoltaic panels, structural load details in the fire code. There's emergency responder communication, energy storage provisions that reflect new technologies and applications, and construction fire safety requirements. In the plumbing code, there's accommodations for multiple toilet facilities serving all genders and shared restrooms. We have the mechanical code where there are improved exhaust ventilation for nail salons. The electric code has electric vehicle power transfer for bi-directional current flow of electricity. So for example, as you've probably seen some advertisements on TV where certain electric vehicles will have an advertisement where the house has a power loss. You can take the energy from the car and send it back to the house for those short periods of time where there's a power loss. Other significant changes in the fuel and gas code has to do with return air in mechanical rooms, clothes dryers located in closets that exhaust more than 200 cubic feet per minute. We have the existing building code that has provisions for unsafe structures and equipment, and smoke and carbon monoxide requirements. In the residential code has the use of commercial cooking equipment. Occasionally you have a house so big, and we have come across that here in Scottsdale, where they do a lot of entertaining and they can afford to have commercial cooking equipment, and typically that has to go by way of a variance or a code modification on my part. This addresses that for those types of structures, and also energy storage systems. In the International Energy Code, there are improved energy measures related to insulation, duct leakage, solar heat gain, mechanical systems, water heating, and lighting. Lighting has been updated to reflect new lighting technologies, and also there is an electric vehicle charging infrastructure amendment in the Energy Code. In the Green Code, this is for commercial structures, and I want to emphasize that the Green Building Code is for commercial structures. It does not address single-family residences or multifamily if you have a multifamily project that's greater than 3 stories above grade, the Green Building Code would come into play. But if it's less than 3 stories, it does not come into play, and that's very clear in the Energy Code. But some of the things that the significant changes trying to address: heat island mitigation, electric vehicle ready charging infrastructure, water efficiency, on-site photovoltaic solar, low VOC interior materials and finishes, construction waste management, and low-impact building materials. We did receive some community input throughout this process. We've been working on this for the better part of a year now, and we feel that the community will benefit from up-to-date safety and resource conserving codes that account for new technologies, materials, and building systems. The update will improve community value and quality of life while protecting natural resources. And also, the update will clarify code provisions while enhancing life safety, reducing fossil fuel generated energy use, conserving water, and improving indoor air quality. The community impact, we came across a study done by the National Cost Effectiveness Study done by the U.S. Department of Energy and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and it shows that construction based on 2021 Energy Code is cost-effective in our climate zone 2B, which is an arid desert environment, Scottsdale. The simple payback period is 7.5 years for single-family and low-rise multifamily buildings. Homeowners will see or should see, according to this study, a positive cash flow in 2 years. Keep in mind, this is part of this study. Part of the community input that we received was from the Building Advisory Board of Appeals, and we do have members from that board present tonight. We have the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission, and we have members there. We also received input from the Home Builders Association of Central Arizona, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, Arizona Multi-Housing Association, American Institutes of Architects from Arizona, Nelson Partners Architects and Planners, the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors, Experience Scottsdale, the American Lung Association, Environment Arizona, Southwest Gas and Electric Utilities, the Arizona Public Interest Resource Group, and Vote Solar. Now we're getting into some of the recommendations from the various boards, and our Building Advisory Board of Appeals recommends adoption of all codes with staff amendments, except for the following. No energy code amendments for EV, electric vehicle charging, cool roofs, solar, photovoltaic option, HVAC, which is your heating and ventilation and air conditioning, commissioning exemptions, no residential IRC amendment for pull-out trash and recycling bins in kitchens of new single-family homes. Keep the code, the green code, the IGCC, as a public benefit for zoning bonus consideration, keeping it as a voluntary code as it is currently. The Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission has some different recommendations. They recommend the energy code adoption with amendments, EV capable, electric vehicle capable charging for new single-family, multifamily, and hotels, cool roofs for low-slope roofs of new residential and commercial buildings, solar photovoltaic compliance option for new single-family homes, amended exceptions for commercial heating and cooling and ventilation system commissioning. They recommend an amendment to the residential code to provide pull-out trash recycling bins in the kitchen of new single-family homes. They recommend that the green building code as a mandatory code for new commercial and multifamily projects, and electrification proposed amendment for all gas appliances in new single-family homes. In other words, what happened is where gas is provided for, and I'll use the example for a stove for cooking, you also have the ability to have a 220 outlet for an electric stove, so that in the future, if somebody wants to change out gas for electric, they have that opportunity to do so if they do so desire. So we do have some options for the council and the things that we're seeking for some direction on. the staff recommendation, I want to emphasize that that staff recommendation is because I staff the Building Advisory Board of Appeals, is to recommend adoption of all the codes with amendments with the following exceptions. Adopt the energy code without amendments for EV-capable charging, cool roofs, solar PV option, and HVAC commissioning exceptions. Adopt the residential code without the amendment for pull-out trash recycling bins in kitchens of new single-family homes, and keep the green building code as a public benefit for zoning bonus consideration voluntary. Option B, the environmental advisory recommendations, they will recommend the adoption of all codes with amendments, including the residential amendment for trash pull-out recycling bins in kitchens of new single-family homes, energy code amendments for EV-capable charging, cool roofs, solar photovoltaic option, and HVAC system commissioning. Green code as a mandatory code. We need to consider what that will do as far as staff reports and resources for building code plan review and compliance, if the council so directs us to do that. And then a third option is to remain with the current codes, which I would not recommend that we do, as it would put us behind the industry standards and may negatively affect our ISC insurance rating. If I could use the Elmo. There we go. I just wanted to put this up here. One of the things as far as option B is concerned, if the council so gives us that direction, what I'm concerned about are the energy code and the green codes. As I stated earlier, our intent is to bring all of these codes to the City Council for action on September 20th, 2022. If you wish to make the green code mandatory and go with the provisions of the energy code, we would like to have the opportunity for more public outreach on the energy and the green codes, and we would recommend that the council consider that we conduct a joint Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission and the Building Advisory Board of Appeals meeting to have a conduct meeting and to allow interested parties to provide inputs to both parties at the same time. And then we would bring back the energy and green codes before the end of the year for council action and a January 23rd implementation date. The rest of the codes that I showed you, we would like to continue on to have that for your consideration September 20th, and then and with the implementation of January 1st. So as far as the implementation date, there's no harm in that, but this would give us a time to where staff could really get into studying what the changes of the new code is. It'll give us time to have some of our architects, engineers to prepare drawings in accordance with the 2021 codes. And also we have a lot of standard residential projects that would need to be updated to today's code. One other thing that I'd like to do, because I know this is a lot of information, and hopefully this will help with the understanding of what we're trying to do, is this chart that we put up here, and hopefully you can read it and you can see what we're just trying to illustrate what the Building Advisory Board and the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission, where they stand on these proposed amendments, so that you can see who is a proponent of the amendments and who disagreed with that. Depending, of course, upon the council direction, this could change. And that's what we're seeking tonight, because we do have two differences of opinions or on amendments. And so we would like to have the council give us direction on how to proceed. With that, we do have a couple of speakers, and I would like to with your permission, I would like to introduce Natalie Christian Lazar and give her an opportunity to speak. And then after that, she is representing the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission. And then afterwards, Julian Anderson, who is representing the Building Advisory Board of Appeals, we would invite him to come up to speak. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Oh, goodness. Mayor Ortega, honorable council members, my name is Natalie Chrisman Lazar, and I am the chair of the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission, also known as SEEK. I live in Scottsdale at 7647 East Turquoise Avenue. What does a few more days of temperatures over 100 degrees mean to you? Moreover, how about nights over 90 degrees? When will the effects of the drought require an increase in cost of water that reflects the scarcity of this resource? Do you worry about your child or grandchild playing outdoors on high pollution advisory days? Does the fact that we as a city are literally throwing away an alarming amount of recyclable and reusable material in a landfill that could fill sometime in the next 10 years give you pause? The effects of our urban heat island, finite water supply, poor air quality, and limited waste resources are very real concerns that our citizenry is passionate about because they matter. They matter so much that we voted as a city to specifically include policies to address these challenges in our 2035 general plan. But how does that directly affect the subject of your study session tonight? Maintaining sound and timely building codes is vitally important because the codes reflect the direction that our built environment will head for years to come. Given the timelines required to progress an idea from concept to fruition, delays in translating policies into the reality of code requirements could leave us flat-footed when it comes to reducing our overall impact of the built environment on human health and our natural resources. With my limited time here before you, I will touch on 3 key points that SEEK would like to share with you. The first, SEEK is overwhelmingly in support of code adoption. The amendments that you see in your packet are comprehensive and we support them. The second is the importance of integrating the electric vehicle charging infrastructure into this code cycle. And the third is how a mandatory green building code based on the International Green Construction Code, or IGCC, furthers not only Scottsdale's green building leadership, but also aligns and implements the voter-approved 2035 general plan. First off in your packet, city building staff have recommended, as Mr. Clack indicated, a base level of code updates that are listed as many acronyms, and I'm not going to go into them here. Staff's recommendation may be a little confusing because we talk about some of the amendments that are there, and then they identify amendments that they do not recommend. So that it sounds a little bit confusing, but truly when we are talking about some of the EV amendments, they're in the presentation, but they don't recommend them. So what I am trying to identify here for you is truly, the complexity of what it is that you're hearing, but in general, what they're trying to say is we need staff direction. We need direction from you guys, or we need council direction, I'm sorry. We need council direction to make some of those decisions. Likely the most significant item that they need your leadership on is the direction to make the city's green building code mandatory. SEEK recommends the comprehensive and forward-thinking amendments presented in your packet because they contribute to the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. They reduce our energy bills, and they enhance our community's resilience. Specifically, with reference to electric vehicles, all reports of EV purchases show record sales and a growing market share. An independent analysis completed by Boston Consulting Group, Deloitte, Guidehouse, and Wood Mackenzie projects EVs will represent 10% of the light-duty vehicles on the road in the U.S. in the next 8 years. Closer to home, the Arizona Department of Transportation is executing a plan that's the draft plan was just put out in August this year, to spend over $95 million in federal and matching funds in the next 5 years on EV infrastructure. Electric vehicles are not a fad. They are a solution that all major auto manufacturers have doubled down on to address one of the largest sources of carbon emissions in our society, the use of our beloved cars and trucks to get where we want to go. With the electric utility industry fully committed to transitioning from carbon-based fuels, we are at a sea change moment in history with respect to mobility, and Scottsdale needs to be positioned to support our residents, businesses, and visitors as they make the move to cleaner, healthier air. The EV proposals included in the amendments appropriately balance cost with benefit. They are well vetted at the national scale, achievable, and hone in on the place where most EVs are charged, where we live. For new homes, the requirement is that the residential structures are EV capable, i.e. that they essentially have space in the panel and a pathway from the panel to a parking space for future equipment. For multifamily structures and hotels, 20% of parking spaces would need to be EV capable, like that. But 4% would need to have all the infrastructure to actually charge an EV. These provisions are important because the cost to retrofit an EV charging infrastructure on a per parking space basis can be as high as 3 to 4 times that of planning for it in new construction. Remember, the life of our residential and multifamily structures is measured in decades. This code cycle needs to plan for future EV infrastructure so that costs are properly controlled and support our residents, businesses, and visitors' future charging needs. Lastly, SEEK recommends that Council adopt a mandatory green building code that will be applicable to all future commercial and multifamily development, as Mr. Clack indicated. The history of Scottsdale's green building program is coveted by our sister cities, and we are lucky to have Mr. Anthony Floyd here and in his leadership and as a nationally renowned green building expert at the helm. Over the last 10 years, use of a voluntary green building code has improved the quality of our built environment, demonstrated that when developers choose to, they can construct cost-effective, community-enhancing projects that will reduce the very real environmental impacts of the buildings they construct for years to come. There are 3 considerations I encourage you to weigh when making your decision to continue with a voluntary green code or adopt a mandatory green code under the IGCC. The first is that a considerable amount of time and effort has been put into aligning the proposed amendments to the IGCC with Scottsdale's 2035 general plan. Implementing it as a mandatory code will progress the policies that the public voted on and approved. 2, the mandatory code saves time and levels the playing field for builders and developers by clearly identifying the rules that everyone must play by. And 3, any concerns from city building staff regarding resources to manage a mandatory code can be addressed with prioritization of said resources by City Council. In conclusion, you may have heard from various constituencies that many of the proposals in the SEEK recommended amendments are decisions best left to the individual. That having or not having a recycling bin, an electric vehicle, or an array of solar panels is a personal lifestyle choice. However, I submit to you that we are a connected community, and the changes we aspire to make tackle very real challenges that must be addressed collectively. We have limited natural resources that by their very nature must be shared. The water we use, the air we breathe, the very land that we live on are finite. We should start acting like it. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would ask Mr. Julian Anderson from the Building Advisory Board of Appeals to come up next.
Mayor Ortega, council members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. My name is Julian Anderson. I'm the Vice Chair of the Building Advisory Board of Appeals. And I live in the McCormick Ranch area of Scottsdale and have lived in Scottsdale for 24 years. Thanks for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the board. As a reminder, the Building Advisory Board of Appeals has two roles. The first role is to recommend that minor variances in the electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and other codes be granted and that alternative building materials and applications be used. That's one. The other is to make recommendations on amendments and adoption of new building codes. That's what it does. Members of the Building Advisory Board of Appeals are appointed by you, the members of the council. They are required to be qualified by experience and training to pass judgment on construction matters, particularly building construction matters. As Mr. Clack pointed out, building codes exist to ensure, number one, safety in buildings and maintenance of life safety. So you do not want your buildings falling down, that's primary, and you want the life safety aspects of the building to work so that if there's a disaster or an accident, a fire, whatever, everything works as it should and people get out of their buildings, stay alive one way or another. In the United States, model codes are generally based on standards. In the case here, ANSI, American National Standard Institute's standards that are then referred to when model codes are developed. Code committees comprise large groups of people from various backgrounds. Codes are not developed lightly. They are not developed without input. They are well considered and brought forward. The City of Scottsdale reviews the model codes and makes amendments to those codes based on the needs of the local environment and its citizens. In developing the recommendations that were put forward by the Building Advisory Board of Appeals, which if you notice that list, it's a small list that there's a disagreement between the board and the commission. It's a very small list. There is a substantial list of things that were agreed that both the board and the commission agree upon. And our board heard testimony from a variety of parties. Mr. Clack went through some of them. It was comprehensive. The board listened closely to all testimony. Anthony Floyd came and gave a great number of presentations to us, spoke to us about the ups and downs and the ins and outs of all those things that were being put forward. And the Board of Appeals, Building Advisory Board of Appeals, is not deaf to environmental issues. It's not. It considers those issues deeply. But throughout the meetings and the testimony heard, there were a variety of opinions, often conflicting. What people keen on environmental issues proposed were often deeply opposed by home builders, multifamily builders, for a variety of reasons. But as I look at it, I would categorize the amendments that were put forward, all of the amendments, not just these on the shown on the screen a few minutes ago, as falling into perhaps four buckets. The first is the administrative bucket, those things that are necessary to make the codes work. In other words, changes to make sure that they refer to the City of Scottsdale in particular. Continuation of code amendments, so things that were included in previous versions of the code that we wanted to bring forward to include in the new codes. And there's a raft of those, things that the City of Scottsdale has already agreed to and has implemented. There were environmental issues, as Mr. Clack noticed, and then there were financial issues, things that would make things more expensive or less expensive for the end user, whether it be a home buyer or an apartment renter. All of those things were looked at. The board accepted the amendments to 9 codes as presented. There were a couple that we've just talked about that the board did not accept, and Michael Clack has shown you what those were. And those were not accepted by the board for 6 general reasons. So I don't want to bore you by going through every one, but there were 6 general reasons. First, did these amendments really belong in building codes? Because these are codes, building codes, to deal with life safety and the maintenance, to deal with building safety and the maintenance of life safety. Secondly, on one account, we were advised that perhaps state law did not actually allow the amendment as presented to us. And we had advice that probably that was true. There was a cost impact on some of these items. And the cost impact can be brushed off, I guess. And we heard Natalie talk very clearly and sensibly about the lower cost to install something when the building is under construction originally, as opposed to retrofitting. But the question is, should that actually be required anyway? Because to do something the first time assumes that the consumer actually wants it. Where in Scottsdale, which is in many areas of Scottsdale kind of affluent, if a consumer wanted it, would they not just ask for it in the first place, require it themselves, rather than the city asking for it? And then on other matters, the cost of housing, particularly for low-income earners in the city of Scottsdale, is unaffordable. And so to add cost where it is not absolutely necessary was something that the Building Advisory Board of Appeals questioned. We also recognize that this is not the end of the road. These codes evolve all the time, and the things that are not necessarily included in this round may well be recommended by the International Code Council in a next round or a subsequent round. So this is not saying these things will never happen. It's saying that the Building Advisory Board of Appeals has a view at the moment, but as things evolve, there might be things that become standard which will be accepted later. And then finally, in respect of the International Green Construction Code, there was a preference that it remain optional. And as Natalie testified, it has been successful as an optional code. It is used as a lever, or perhaps another way of putting it, an incentive when considering development proposals, and that's a benefit for the City of Scottsdale to have that lever as an option. That's the end of my testimony. Thank you very much for hearing me. Appreciate it.
Well, I could defer again to Michael Clack, but I think what I'll do is perhaps go to public comment, and that would, Councilwoman Whitehead, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Anthony Floyd. So there is a lot of talk about this providing EV infrastructure in houses and in buildings. So I'm hoping you can explain to the council and to those here, are we providing actual EV infrastructure, as in charging stations? Are we requiring anything that requires some sort of charging infrastructure in these buildings?
Yes, Mayor, Councilwoman Whitehead. No, it's not requiring actual charging equipment. It's only the infrastructure for the charging equipment. It's to ensure that there's enough electrical capacity in the service panel. And there is a difference between EV ready and EV capable. We're proposing EV capable.
So yeah, I do want to talk about that. I just want to explain to those who may not know it, but when developers build houses, they provide indoor wiring. Is that a surprise to anybody? So what we're asking here is to provide a room, not even additional wiring, but room in the junction box to allow a future resident or future business to add a wire. So let's talk about the EV capable versus EV ready. In EV ready, we would require the builder to, and I'll let you finish.
Yes, for EV ready, you require the builder to put in a circuit breaker and to run your your conductors, your electrical wiring to a junction box in the garage. And that's it. It's just to have the circuit in, but that's EV ready. So it would be a little more expensive to put in the wire and the breaker. But EV capable is just having the electrical capacity and reserving a breaker space for future installation and to run conduit or raceway to the junction box. So it doesn't require pulling wires or installing circuit breakers.
So what the SEIC recommendations, the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission, SEIC's recommendation is EV capable, which means not a single new wire goes into the house. We simply provide a junction box and a conduit so that should that future resident want an electric car, they simply have the capability to run the wires that they pay for themselves and install the actual infrastructure, the actual charging system. So we're talking about a junction box and conduit. I mean, does this, in your experience, does this add any significant cost, any measurable cost to building the house?
Well, it depends on the size of the house, too, in terms of where the electrical service is and where the garage is. In most cases, if the electrical service is by the garage, on the outside exterior wall of the garage, then there's no expense involved.
Right, so the average house. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councilwoman Caputi. Another question for Anthony. You're in the hot seat. We'll call Michael next. Oh, wait.
Can you think of a modern-day home builder who puts in a panel that doesn't have the capacity for an extra breaker space?
Most spaces do, or service panels do have excess space.
Especially with lighting coming down into LED these days, there's usually excess capacity in breakers, right?
Correct.
And this is what I do for a living myself,
Yeah.
so it's just hard to imagine a home being built today that wouldn't have an extra space in the breaker.
Yeah, what happens is over time, those spaces are used for other things, whether it's equipment in the garage, workshop, or additional appliances added. So this is to reserve a space for future EV, and to ensure the capacity is there based upon other appliances, equipment that may be added to the house.
Sure, again, hard to picture, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Mayor Ortega, can I ask a question?
Yes, Vice Mayor Durham, please chime in.
Thank you. What you've been talking about is true of housing, but for hotels and multifamily, they have to take it up another step, don't they, to the EV capable? Or maybe the other way, to the EV capable. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question about multifamily.
Well, I thought that for multifamily and hotels, they had to take another step of building the EV infrastructure. So beyond what is necessary for a single family home.
Yes, Vice Mayor Durham. Actually, it's 20% of the parking spaces need to be EV capable. But once again, there's no wires or breakers that are installed. And it's probably more critical for multifamily to ensure the 20%. And then there is a requirement to require at least 20 amp capacity for those charging spaces and sizing the electrical equipment. But no wires are pulled.
So no wires or plugs or anything to plug the car into?
Correct, just a raceway.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we will, well, I'm going to add one question because I see that picture of the waterfront there and use that as an example. So there's the two towers at the Scottsdale waterfront. It's on our big screen here. And they have 90 units each. They were built 20 years ago or so. And the reason I'm pointing them out is that they're, of course, not eligible for this new code change. And I do know that there's at least one resident of that, those housing units in this room. And the problem they have is that their infrastructure isn't powered enough for them to have EV. So it's one thing to say I'm EV ready because I've got a panel and I've got a conduit in my house, but there is a increased demand that has to be accounted for by APS or SRP and trenched, built, and so forth. So in this case, they are not, as I understand it, able to retrofit because their infrastructure isn't sized for it. So if you were to say that we would suppose that this was provided for every new house and every new subdivision, there would have to be an upsizing, in my opinion, an upsizing of the general infrastructure to that subdivision. Now, again, maybe only 10% of the people would perhaps buy electric vehicles, but they would all have that electrical infrastructure to them, which would be a higher demand. And again, we have limited resources either at the generating plant or, but they would have to be all upsized. Now that gets us to a certain critical point where it's, in fact, you know, having a conduit and naming that is sort of like saying, well, I have 4 hose bibs on my house, but the city's only delivering me, water through a 5/8 inch line. So it's just part of this whole discussion as we again, we're just in work study, nothing's being defined ultimately, but that's how it all plays out. It would be no different than adding on a new appliance, a major appliance, and that does cost a drain on the system. Okay, we're just, again, discussing this. Councilmember Milhaven, then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Yeah, I do see other colleagues want to speak, but I was wondering if we might not hear public comment before we continue our deliberations, so we have...
You're right. Then we've had a few questions, so I'm fine with that. Can we hold on that, Councilwoman Caputi? Okay. Let's go on to an architect, a representative from Nelson Partners, Linnea Brudenell. Please state your name, and then you have 3 minutes.
Setting my timer now. Thank you, council members, for your attention tonight on the second night of council meetings and at the end of the night. My name is Linnea Brudenell, and I am a licensed architect and the Director of Sustainability for Nelson Partners. We are a planning and architectural firm. We have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, up at Kierland, Scottsdale Corridor area, and in Austin, Texas. My particular role is very nuanced. I act as an in-house energy code consultant and sustainability consultant. My background is I was a former sustainability consultant. I also worked for Quest Energy Group. One of the members of that team is sitting here tonight as an energy consultant. And I went back to architecture about 7 years ago when I went to work at Nelson Partners. My job is to work directly with municipalities across the country to ensure our projects are compliant with local energy codes, local amendments, state requirements, and required sustainability ordinances and goals, as well as deliver projects on time and on budget, which is very important, as you can imagine, for a developer-driven firm. My focus is specifically on commercial projects. That is my focus tonight. And I'd like to talk briefly about my experiences in the market, and specifically with the International Green Construction Code, which is currently used as a developer incentive. What we've seen in the market, in the post-pandemic market specifically, is that demand for a high-performance building product with healthy indoor air quality, stringent water conservation, electrification, energy efficiency, and as well as energy and water resiliency planning is becoming the market norm in the developer-driven world. I have personally been in the proverbial trenches working on successful IGCC projects in Scottsdale. I've known Anthony Floyd for upwards of 15 years in this industry. He is definitely well known in the International Code Council community. The IGCC is used by our developers for development incentives during zoning, and they love it. They don't mind using it. It's very straightforward to comply. The product is typically compliant anyway at this point in time. Makes my job very easy. I have had the privilege of working with many local builders and local agencies in many municipalities where we use mandatory green construction codes, like the IGCC has been proposed. The cost is negligible because it's baked into the project from conceptual design and included in all the contract documents. The specifications and the drawings clearly state the IGCC requirements on a project before it goes to bid. Many of our clients use the Green Building Third-Party Rating and/or IGCC to qualify for project financing or mortgage interest point deductions. Banks and financing agencies are requiring this because the product is a higher quality product and proven to have lower operational costs. That's it. I had more.
No, you still have.
Keep going.
You still have 25 seconds.
Okay. Quickly, the architects and developers and builders that have been using the IGCC in Scottsdale successfully for years in the commercial sector, and as proposed as a mandatory code, it is heavily amended, lots of additional options for compliance, and compliance is very easy. It is an IGCC light. Solar is required on an IGCC project. However, the amendments allow for many other options, so solar is not actually a mandatory component. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Rebecca Grossman, Scottsdale Realtors, and then
Mayor, I had a question for that speaker. Would that be okay?
I'm sorry. There was a question for you, Anaya. Sorry. Excuse me.
I thought I could escape.
I'm sorry. This is covering it.
Thank you, Linnea. So the IGCC is not mandatory in Arizona, but is it mandatory in other states and cities around the country or similar code?
Yes, similar building codes, similar to the IGCC or the actual IGCC, are mandatory for commercial projects in many other large and medium-sized cities. Salt Lake City, Austin, Texas, Baltimore, Dallas, Texas, Chicago, Seattle, New York City are just a few. I'm not going to get into the California green building codes, but there is mandatory provisions statewide for green building in California.
What about states? Have any states adopted the code?
Yes, let's see, South Carolina, Wyoming, Montana, very surprising, those particular states. I haven't memorized my list yet. There's about 7 or 8 that have adopted it statewide.
Okay, thank you. So I keep hearing about costs, and I kind of wonder if it's who pays the cost. Is it mutually exclusive? Either you get the high-quality, green, low-utility bill project, or you get affordable housing, or can you do both?
You can definitely do both. When you're planning and designing a project from the conceptual phase and it's baked into the project, material selections using local and regional materials and building in water conservation measures, energy efficiency measures, high efficiency mechanical systems. We have many affordable housing projects in Austin, Texas that are required to use a green building program. And if the affordable housing market can do this and produce product, it's definitely feasible. I think the real cost for increased rents and in the multifamily sector is really the supply and demand problem, which is very complex.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll look out. Let's see. We have Rebecca Grossman, Scottsdale Realtors, and then Peter Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council members, for allowing me to speak today. As a Scottsdale resident, it is always a pleasure to present to our distinguished leaders. As CEO of the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors, I wish to speak on our support of Scottsdale's proposed energy conservation building code changes for single-family residential homes to require electric vehicle EV charging station infrastructure. When we are asked to weigh in on these issues, our process is simple. We reference our public policy platform and determine if the proposal aligns with those positions. Our association's platform gives us the following direction for this issue. We support reasonable regulations regarding property use or land use which preserve or improve property values, affordability, and the overall quality of life in our communities. We look to ensure the effective standards and design options provide a durable roadmap for future growth and development, which balances having a choice of housing options in conjunction with conservation, incorporation of the environment, and the wise use of our natural resources. When our members sell Scottsdale, they are selling all the features that a home has to offer: comfort, convenience, neighborhood amenities, drive time to work, to school, to restaurants, safety, healthy environment, efficiency, and a whole host of other things that go into that home buying decision. The industry also demands that we anticipate the future needs of homeowners. It is estimated that 25% of U.S. households will have at least one electric car by the end of 2025. If this building code change is approved, Scottsdale will once again prove that it leads in important policy decisions. The city showed leadership when it decided to require fire suppression in all new homes, and that program is admired across the U.S. Compared to that, this change is a remarkably small cost requirement and a chance to get out ahead of a fast-growing trend. The cost to add the EV capability after the fact is much more expensive. Other factors that make this a reasonable choice to support are currently the areas of Scottsdale where new builds exist are primarily in higher price point neighborhoods where the average household income and lifestyle support the consumer ownership of electric vehicles and the expectations that it will be available as needed. Because the proposed change only requires a single raceway, receptacle, and reserved breaker space to be installed, this allows for the flexibility of the homeowner to accommodate the technical specifications of their electric vehicle, which can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Similar to pre-wiring for security systems, sound systems, and cable throughout the house, things that 20 years ago were not part of a new build's infrastructure, the time has come for EV charging capability. So in conclusion, I am proud to restate that the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors is in full support of the proposed changes presented as R404.4 and R404.4.1 of the new update for the Scottsdale Building Code. Thank you.
Well timed. Okay, Peter Palmer, then Michael Kravitz.
Mayor Ortega, City Council members, I'm Pete Palmer, 7181 East Camelback Road, Scottsdale, or the waterfront. Actually, the mayor pretty well summed up my coverage, but I'll go ahead and go through it anyway. For the past couple years, the Waterfront Condo Association, and I'm on the board, has been looking for solutions to increase the number of EV charging stations in our garage. And we have about 400 parking spaces in our garage. Initial construct of this area did not include an infrastructure to support the rise in EV charger power requirements. We've explored multiple different options for potential solutions, but at this point, construction costs are prohibitive since our current requirement would only support 2% of our residents. There is no feasible option for a resident to pay for installation of additional power capabilities for their parking location. Current impact, we cannot support all our recurrent residents' EV charging needs. We cannot support future EV charging needs for the residents who want to buy an electric vehicle, and we've already lost sales to potential future residents who will only purchase if they can have an EV charging station. I had the opportunity to review a summary of the proposed policy, not the whole policy, and I personally would recommend you approve the EV policy, at least for the multifamily members. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Kravitz, then Jim Myers.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Michael Kravitz, 10430 East Skinner Drive, Scottsdale. I'm an architect. I am also a member of the Building Advisory Board and of Appeals. And Mr. Anderson did an amazing job recapping our charge and what we did. I'd just like to say that when we were reviewing each one of these changes, we took into consideration hours and hours of testimony and discussions with the public, with all of the interested parties, with all of the agenda, with all of the different opinions. Yet, it came down to several items when we made our final decisions. Number one was the fact that the building codes are remedial in that they secure the interest of the public for the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. The building codes are different than the zoning codes. The zoning codes, in many cases, will incorporate some of the items that we're discussing because they can be incorporated on a citywide or a city-by-city basis. The building codes are more of a national identity. Years ago, I was appointed by a governor of another state to write a building code that was based on the International Building Code model, just as Scottsdale uses. And in our charge was, again, to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public, general welfare of the public, I should say, and to look at the cost and the implementation of costs to the public. I think the Advisory Board of Appeals did that. But I think that when we look at costs, we have to look at all of the costs and not just, oh, well, this is baked into our project cost at the beginning of a project, as was discussed a little bit earlier. The final costs of implementing the Green Building Code are burdensome to all residents. They increase costs by hundreds of thousands of dollars on larger projects, and perhaps a little bit less than that. The GBCC Green Building Code was originally implemented with having to have agents that would approve the project and put it through. It was primarily used for very high-end commercial buildings and governmental buildings, and as a result, the costs were prohibitive. Today's building code implements approximately 90 to 95% of those requirements by keeping, in addition to keeping, the Green Building Code voluntary. And there's a reason why the international codes kept that code voluntary. As Mr. Clack has stated and we've discussed, our charge as architects, we feel that we should adopt the codes as they are written and not be reactive, because if we are, there's unintended consequences. But again, as the Advisory Board of Appeals, I think we did an excellent job, and I think we addressed what the public was asking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jim Myers.
Mayor Ortega and council members, thank you so much. I am Jim Myers. I am the director of the buildings program at SWEEP, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. We're a 501c3 organization. We are based in Colorado, but we have staff in 5 of our 6 states that we cover in the Southwest. And so I appreciate the opportunity. We submitted a letter to you in support. And so we support the Building Advisory Board's suggestion of adopting the 2021 IECC as is, a base code adoption. That's great. But we also suggest that EV infrastructure should be included for the city of Scottsdale. There's already 3 cities in Arizona that have adopted EV infrastructure. Sedona up the road, Flagstaff a little further north, and then you go south to Tucson. They have EV infrastructure. In fact, Tucson has a meeting going on right now where we have one of our staff participating in that virtually, talking about their multifamily and commercial. So it's happening in the state where I'm based out of Colorado. There's over a dozen municipalities that have EV infrastructure. So it's happening in the code. One of the individuals earlier talked about life safety in the IECC, and was it really a life safety code? I want to mention that it is. Just think about a building a house on a 115-degree day with no cooling. There's resiliency in the energy code, the ability for those occupants to stay in that building, that house, longer than having to rely on the community to support them for cooling or in a cold climate. We also support the mandatory IGCC. We really focus on the energy efficiency and zero energy, but the International Green Construction Code is a code to help the municipality of Scottsdale reach your climate goals that you have set. Just recently, I saw this week that J.D. Powers released an article. We all know J.D. Powers and their article, their surveys of happiness of ownership of vehicles. Well, they also did it for public charging stations. Within that article I read, it was interesting, the EV owners were happiest with the ability to charge at home. And so when they don't have that ability to charge at home, then they're having to go off and find those public charging stations. And lastly, there is economic benefits, and we documented that. We pulled the information from those studies that Michael Clack mentioned from PNNL, that you can see a large savings, as an example, $101,000 a year just for single-family homes every year. That would come to remain in the economy of the city of Scottsdale. Thank you so much.
Well, at this point, we can chime in with other questions. I just thought I'd mention, I believe, a good process to keep track of. Again, we want to give some clear direction to staff, have discussion on every topic as we go. And rather than miss anything, I would like us to look at page 10 of 12. It has a list of the codes, and if we're able to discern, as we go through the list, and of course, then we'll be able to check those off as far as if there's any exclusion or something that might be applicable. Now, that's the way I'd like to do it. People may be prepared with other statements of preferences, but I want us to be sure that we can give staff direction on these 11 different codes that are listed. So if that makes sense, for instance, the first one is the International Building Code for 2021. And in that case, that's the general building code that that was presented, perhaps with only a few amendments, but if I were to go into those amendments, I've been an architect here too long, you know, that every city has additional comments to a code. And so every city, Mesa, Scottsdale, would have a provision that might say, oh, you have to have an elevator if the building's such a size, or for instance, for our other applicability. So that's my intent, to hopefully go through the list, get a nod this way or not. Again, in general, there's some agreement, but I'm not, this is just the presented council item. In this case, it's the staff recommendations. In my opinion, I'm not weighing them heavier. I'm just saying that's how we could perhaps go through the list with some clarity. Now, at this point, I'm certainly open to general comments about any particular item that's been discussed. I see Councilmember Millhaven may have...
I'm sorry, just trying to figure out page 10 of what?
Oh, well, it's a council report.
Yeah, because I'm in the council agenda. 12. When I go to the work study agenda, and I pull it up, I'm not getting it, so I apologize for my...
I keep a hard copy, but what we can do then, just so you know the order I'm trying to keep track of.
That's what I'd like to follow. So if I go to 8/23/22, regular agenda.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you had the overhead
I was
slides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now here you go to page 10 of 12.
When I open that, I get...
So it's our work study.
Well, no, so if I go to the agenda that's in I get this memorandum, I don't... So I just have to keep scrolling, I'm sorry.
Even if you go slower. Okay, so what we have here is the same list of items, 12 items.
Well, that's a list of attachments, that's not a list of recommendations. So what are you saying it's for?
We'll make copies. I just want everyone to follow along.
If it's on 479, I can find it.
Basically, our index lists the 12 codes that were spoken for, including the pool, spa, pool, et cetera. So I'm hoping we can, again, comment if there's anything in particular that caught your eye, and then make sure that we can have a productive work study based on that list of 12. Are we okay? Now, the index then has the references to all of them, and of course they get really, really thick later. Does that make sense?
Well, actually, I have a recommendation to that.
Okay.
Okay, so there's agreement on all of the codes. There are a number of codes, obviously, on that big list. There's agreement on all of the codes other than the IGCC, IECC, and IRC. So the question for all the codes other than those three is, do we keep the current codes or do we adopt the new codes? And I think that we should first do that, and then we can focus in on the three areas where there's some different viewpoints.
Well, you're right. I could have said that as a whole, but I'd prefer not to. I'd rather say that, at least we know, or if we give a nod because we want consensus on it, we want to discuss, there may be a particular item. Now, for instance, and I'm just trying to alert us to the process here, does that make sense, Vice Mayor Durham? Otherwise, we're going to have scattered comments, and I know we're going to focus on the ones that are disputed. Overall, see, Councilwoman Caputi and Councilwoman Janik, any comments just as to how I'm trying to handle this so we're okay. I just want to get a checklist so that we can not...
I'm having problems figuring out which the page 10 is also.
Page 478.
So what we have is we have the index that's in the same order of the 12 letters A through L. And on page 10 of 12, it happens to have some staff discussion on that. And at this point, in terms of the adoption of, and then the staff's request was to move on the important ones, so to speak, or that they would be brought forward by September 20th, which may include up to, the first 9. Is that correct? Or just to be clear?
Yes, sir. If I may, I think you've got the general concept of what we're looking for. We're most concerned about the Energy Code and the International Green Construction Code, and then and then the other item in the International Residential Code has to do with the EV capable, and then the electrification for gas appliances.
Okay, well, and that was a subject in the Energy Code, not the others.
Sir.
Okay, so I'm just trying to segment this according to what your presentation was. So you were prioritizing September 20th as a date when we could act on the ones we were in agreement on. And I just want to clarify that. For instance, the fire code, right? International Fire Code, that's B, the second one on the list. I don't think anyone had any objections on that. So what I'm going to do is just try to get a nod, and so we can give you some direction and not just bulk them all together. So on the International Building Code, IBC, and that's the 2021 code. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All of these are the 2021 codes, with the exception of the electrical code.
Yeah.
That's the only one.
Now, as you saw, here the question is about whether we have a pull-out bin or not. Now, remember, we're not voting on this today, but we are giving them a nod that it's generally okay on future builds. Is that permissible on a new kitchen that they might have that? Or not?
Mayor, that's not in that code. The IBC,
well,
I don't believe there's any difference between the two boards. Is that correct, Mr. Kwok?
On the if you're talking about the pull-out trash bins, there is a difference of opinion there.
I see.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Well-
I turned to the wrong.
But is that placed in the IBC?
That is in the IRC.
Okay, well, why is it mentioned here in the IBC on my 10 of 12?
It's actually an IBC too.
It says it's the IBC, yes.
Multifamily.
Okay, for
For
multifamily. it's-
multifamily,
Okay.
it's fine. It's the residential code where there's the disagreement.
Okay.
There is no disagreement on the multifamily.
So at this point, if we would take them one at a time, just to clarify, then are we generally okay with the code, with the discussion still about the pull-out trash or not pull-out trash? Here again, we want to give direction to staff. Well, this will still have to be voted and discussed on later. Frankly, I think when I read this, if we don't have recycling at multifamily, which I believe we don't provide that, or it's voluntarily done at apartments. We don't recycle at multifamily, right? And yet here we're saying, well, maybe they should have 2 bins. Well, what's the difference if they're going to, if we require 2 bins, one for recycling, and we don't actually pick up any recycling? It seems a little strange to me. But go ahead, Councilwoman.
I would suggest that what we're looking at is the future, and I have some meetings set up to begin the process of getting recycling in the downtown area and all the businesses. Voluntary, not mandatory.
Okay, so I'm sorry, what I'm going to do now is, as long as we know the topics, I'm just trying to keep the order of discussion. Councilwoman Caputi, next.
I think it might be easier since we've been given 3 options. I just feel like those 11 are all incorporated in our 3 options. So maybe it would be better time spent if we go back to what our packet suggested, option A, option B, or do nothing, and we could have conversation around the few topics that are actually in discussion for tonight. Because I think in general, most of us want to update our codes. We're just going to get down into the weeds on a couple of these things. But I think staff spent a lot of time sort of bucketing it for us into 3 options, and that would certainly be much more time effective, in my opinion.
Okay, Councilwoman Janik, and then Councilmember Milhaven.
Okay, I think I'm just going to start with what I have written out. It's
Sure.
simpler. It's pretty much what Councilwoman Caputi said. I'd like to get council consensus to direct staff to update the building codes to include Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission recommendations as follow. 1, mandatory green code based on International Green Construction Code, IGCC, for commercial and multifamily projects that furthers policies identified in our voter-approved 2035 general plan. 2, amendments to the International Energy Conservation Code pertaining to a solar compliance option for single-family homes, updated commissioning standards for HVAC systems, EV charging infrastructure, and cool roofs for low-slope roofs.
Excuse me. I really like the process here, but I'd like to get a nod on each of these as we go, because you're mentioning different codes. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
that's
I would
correct.
stop with, repeat
Okay.
the first one, and then we will either
Okay.
go with option A or B, and then your recommendation, if that makes
Okay.
sense. Again, if you read out all 4 of them, then we're voting on 4 at a time instead of 1 at a time. All right, Councilwoman Littlefield, let's let.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm fine with listening to what Betty has and give recommendations on these. I'd also like to recommend that the 2 groups get together and hash out the differences as much as they possibly can before they come back here. Because I think that there's some differences that perhaps aren't as large as they think they are, and that we could have the commission and the Advisory Board of Appeals work together for a week or 2 and see if they can't mesh what they want and get it more concrete, and then have it come back to us again at that point in time and say, we agree on this, this, and this. This is where we're still having a few issues.
Okay.
That's what I would like. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Back to Mr. Clack.
Yes, thank you. I think Councilwoman Littlefield pretty much summed up what our staff recommendation is, and I also have up on the screen to make it a little bit easier to follow where there is some differing opinions, and so what I'm hearing is, you know, you want us to go back and look at the Energy Conservation Code with the items that we're talking there, the International Green Construction Code, making it mandatory, and what I would recommend is that we get more public input on those items and have a joint meeting with Civic and BABA and come back to you by the end of the year with firm recommendation on the amendments in those two areas. And we can also overlap that with the disagreements in the International Residential Code as well under energy conservation and come back to you at that point. What I'm looking for is for the rest of the codes, there doesn't seem to be any conflict between the boards, and that we move forward with those on September 20th for council consideration with our local amendments.
Thank you. Councilmember Millhaven and then Councilwoman Whitehead.
I think you practically took the words out of my mouth, which is to say there's a lot of stuff everybody agrees on. I agree with the comment that Councilmember Whitehead made earlier. There's a bunch of stuff that we all agree on, so I don't know that we need to go through that. These are the things that there's disagreement on. So, and I know when we did our rules of procedure, we said that we can make motions to direct staff to clarify stuff. So why don't I start with something simple and say I'd like to make a motion to direct staff to move forward with all of the proposed changes with the exception of the topics listed here. Yes. Yeah. So that, a second.
I'll second that.
Good. And, you know, do I see any nods on that? Okay, very good.
Okay. And then it's commendable to bring building advisory and the environmental quality groups together, but I think there's huge philosophical differences there, you know, so, and I embody part of that. Yeah, some of this is good because it's good for the environment and good for the community, but then there's the other part of me says, well, if it is cost effective and if it is economical and if it is market driven and they're doing it anyway, why do we need government overreach to be monitoring what the market is already driving anyway? So part of me says, no, don't mandate all this stuff if they're doing it anyway. So I think that probably encapsulates the difference between the environmental quality people are going to say, well, if they're doing it anyway, there's no harm in legislating it. And the other side is going to say, why legislate something if it isn't necessary? So certainly bring them together. I'm not optimistic that they're going to have a meeting of the minds given the philosophical, ideological differences that the two groups probably have. And although you said you heard you make green mandatory, I'm not sure that I'm there, so, but I don't know where the rest of the council is. So I don't know if there's a point in, do we take each of these, whatever they are, 7 or 8, and just do one of these, do another consensus, who wants it, yes or no? Or more work, so it'd be yes, no, or more work.
And this is at this point in time, which is a useful exercise since we've started to discuss those. Councilwoman Whitehead and then Councilwoman Caputi, and I would agree that yes, it's these basic points that we can give a nod to as to at this point the direction that we're giving, and yet also asking for them to meet once again. Yes. So in that case, as we look, I will revert back to Councilwoman Janik and just mention that key point. Yeah, as you have them listed, and then we can either get a nod, yay or nay, on each one individually as we go.
Okay. First of all,
I'm sorry, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Because I do have
Can
some.
I interject when I have a chance to?
Oh, yes.
We might let you in.
Yes, let's let Vice Mayor Durham. Go ahead.
Thanks. I think something that would really help me is to take this list of contested items and give a short, concise explanation of why those changes should not be made. Because I think several of us are leaning in the direction of making the changes, the contested changes listed on the chart. So I realize cost is going to be a big one, but you know, frankly, I don't understand what the cost of the divided trash receptacle would be. In a multifamily, I can imagine that putting in chutes would be considerably more expensive. So I'd like to see a list of those items that are in the little chart, and then an explanation against, or the case against making those changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Whitehead, then Councilwoman Caputi.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, because I have some overarching comments I want to make. First of all, I see no point in bringing the BABA and the SEEK together. These two boards did their job. They reviewed and they made a recommendation, and it's up to this leadership to provide direction to staff. This is not uncommon. We had a transportation commission that desperately wanted a road and voted in that favor of a road within the preserve. We had a preserve commission that that voted to protect a wildlife corridor, and this council made the decision to protect the wildlife corridor. So this is the same type of situation. So I do agree with public comment, and I want to go over, I appreciate that the, I guess, Vice Chair of BABA provided the 6 points. So I do want to go through those. He said, does this belong in the building code? Well, we heard and we know that states and major cities have adopted this as building code. And I would have to also say that the International Code Council wouldn't have adopted it if it didn't belong in a building code. And I also want to point out that after speaking to many representatives in the industry, and it was nice, we heard from developers, architects, environmental groups, the American Lung Association, that while making these mandatory will have a tremendous impact on water conservation, on reducing energy, on reducing electric bills, and on preventing asthma. We have a very high pollution municipality. So while these codes, which clearly are meant to be codes, because that's why they were adopted by the International Code Council, they are cost effective. In fact, they're pretty they're not very cutting edge. They're just effective. But if we don't make them mandatory, what we do is we tilt the playing field in favor of really low-quality developers who really are looking to maximize profit and then get out of town. So I just want to say that, I just want to answer that point. I agree. Do these belong in a building code? Yes, I would argue they do. The other, I'm trying to read my own writing. Your second point was, I think about that the state law. You mentioned state law. Yes, one of the recommendations may conflict with state law. And that recommendation is that we provide an electric outlet wherever there is for gas infrastructure. We have removed that. That is not part of this because we don't want to conflict with state law. That's not really how Scottsdale rolls. We're pretty conservative. So we've taken care of that item, so thank you. The cost impact, as we heard from somebody who's in the field working around the country, there is really minimal cost impact. In fact, developers really thrive on having the same code, having consistent code nationwide, and that is the benefit of adopting international codes like this one, because it provides, developers aren't having to try to accommodate different municipalities. We provide them a consistent code that has been, clearly vetted. So the cost impact, and I just want to point out about that cost impact, that's a cost impact for developers. And I got to tell you something, when we all pay our fair share, we all save money. So if it doesn't really ring true to me that developers, maybe they save a few bucks to make a lesser quality product, there is cost to that. It's just not their cost. So the cost to retrofit, as we heard, is quite significant. So, and when I was in real estate for a while, nobody asked me how much are the taxes of this house, because, honestly, that's not a big deal in Arizona. Every one of my customers said, can I see the current owner's electric bills? Anybody who wants to provide affordable housing in this state would be in favor of these codes, because what we're trying to do effectively, and we know this will work, is reduce electric bills, reduce water bills, and in the process, reduce heat, reduce asthma, and save our precious water. So he also mentioned the cost of housing. That ties in well. So on the cost of housing, right now we have Scottsdale, let's face it, we attract the best developers, and some of those developers weighed in either by writing or by phone, telling me, Solange, go for it, make it mandatory. We do it anyway, because that's the kind of developer we are. So why would we waste our limited negotiations on saying, hey, developer, you want 2 extra floors? How about adopt the IGCC with your building? That's like a waste. When I go to the negotiating table, I want to get something for it. This is something developers are doing around the country. This is something that the developers that come to Scottsdale tend to want to do anyway. So why not make it so that I can negotiate instead for something else, something that developers aren't giving me and something that does cost them, such as affordable housing units. So by not adopting this as mandatory, we're basically tilting the playing field in favor of the developers we don't frankly want, and we're taking away an important negotiating tool. He mentioned that, hey, the codes work as voluntary. Yep, we proved it. We proved that those parties that adopt these codes save water, save energy, reduce heat, reduce pollution. This is all great. But we also know that we are facing a daunting problem on water and energy are interrelated. When you have your air conditioner come on too many times, you're wasting water. You're wasting energy, you're producing heat, you're wasting money, and you're wasting water. So we know that these codes work, and that's why we tried them. That's why we were the leader in Scottsdale. We tried these codes voluntarily to see if they, in fact, would work. And the good news is they do. They do work. They achieve everything we want. The economics are behind it. We save our constituents money, and we know it doesn't cost us. There is not a single developer that is not going to come to Scottsdale because we adopt these codes as mandatory, plain and simple. We get more bang for our buck, and that's what this council's job is to do. So yeah, we tried them as voluntary. Thank goodness we led the way. Now we have cities like Surprise that followed us and also have them as voluntary. And everybody is looking to Scottsdale to see what's next because we set the standard. So the other argument was, he mentioned that this is something we can use for negotiations. And as you just heard, I love negotiating, absolutely. We only want the developers who want to build quality products. They're already using this standard. It's an internationally adopted standard, and it's approved in states throughout this country and cities throughout this country. So yes, let's adopt it as mandatory, and then absolutely, let's go to the negotiating table and get something else. So I do want to say that I wanted to respond to that. I don't see any need for the two commissions to get together again, but then I'm satisfied with going through this item as you suggested, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Caputi, then Councilwoman Janik.
Could you just put the slide back up with option A, option B, no option? A would be good. Okay, so I did think it was going to be a little bit cleaner and easier if we did it this way, and my comments are more big picture. So I would prefer option A. I think that we need to trust our professionals. City staff and the Building Advisory Board of Appeals are our professionals, and this is what they have suggested for us with their expertise. If we go ahead and adopt the current codes, 2021, which is what you're asking us, right? That automatically is going to put us on the cutting edge. There's only 2 other cities right now who've adopted the current codes, which takes us off of 2015, brings us to 2021. That's what you're asking us. I think there's consensus here on this council that we definitely want to go to the absolute most current codes, which again is going to give us the cutting edge. There's 2 cities right now, Cave Creek and Chandler. Those are the only ones that have adopted it. And they're not even adopting as strict as we would be. They've got other exceptions in it. So we would be the leaders in sustainability, as Councilwoman Whitehead says, because that is who Scottsdale is. We are leading the way. And adopting the updated codes would certainly put us there. I think that there's this philosophical question that's more important. I mean, the question is, do we really want government making these decisions? I think the comment from Mr. Parker was that they don't have the plugs now that they need, right? And here we are. That particular development was only built a few years ago, and already the technology has changed. And so do you think that a home builder going to build today is going to say, I'm not going to provide that? Of course, now that the technology requires it, the home builders in Scottsdale are going to make sure that they put it in, because that's what the market requires. We're certainly not going to ask people to pay for things that they don't want. And in terms of mandating the code, as was explained, we're already doing these things, which is fantastic. And again, it's more of a philosophical idea. Are we going to force people to do these things, or are we going to allow the market to make the correct corrections that it makes? To me, again, you're going to technology is going to change. How do we know that people are still going to be plugging cars in their homes in 10 years? And in the meantime, we've made a government mandate which doesn't move as quickly as the market moves. I know, again, I'm in the lighting business. You don't see a spec anymore for light fixtures that aren't LED. It's just not even there. You don't need the government to mandate that. But if the technology changes again in 2 years, we don't want to have to wait for the government mandate to catch up. It's my opinion that we just accept the way the market works because, again, I am a capitalist. And I like the idea of being able to negotiate with developers to work this out and get more things for the city. I totally agree. I think it's a fantastic idea. I think we're already struggling with rising costs and supply chain issues right now. Again, I work in this industry. It's a huge problem, and putting more onerous requirements and mandates it just forces private business to not have as much flexibility. So again, I completely agree with the suggestions that have been given in option A. I think we go ahead and adopt the cutting edge requirements, but I think this council is going to be at odds about the different parts and pieces. And I mean, I'm happy to dig into each one. I think Councilman Durham actually made a great suggestion. Maybe if everybody sees, here are the costs, here are the benefits to each of these 3 or 4 sticking points, that would help us make better decisions. But again, my basic default philosophically is that the building code is meant for issues of life, safety, and welfare, and that overreaching government mandates really belong more in zoning, and it's just not that applicable here. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Janik, then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Okay, so I think we have 2 issues here. The first one is easily resolved, with the exception of, I think it's the next slide, where we have the disagreement. Yeah. We can all agree that we want to proceed. Is everybody in? So you understand that, so yes. We're done with that one. Then the next one is where we, quote, have philosophical disagreements. I don't think they're philosophical. I think they're real. And I don't think it's okay to say, give it up, let the developer decide which way to go. We are Scottsdale. We are a heat island. We are short of water. It's running low. We need to do everything we can do to keep our environment going for 10, 20, 30 years. If things change in 10 years, that's fine. We come back and change it in 5 or 10 years. But right here, right now, I believe it's important to make these changes mandatory. So I go with option B. I do think it's better if we go one by one, but in general, I agree with most of what is in option B. Do you want me to proceed then with a different,
Well,
or do we want to do a?
you know what, I do think that we're ready to give a nod. At the same time, there are some, okay, I have no question about all the provisions regarding water and energy. And I agree. 3 years from now to say, why didn't we do this 3 years ago, is too late. So the water conservation provisions, we're not going to blow over and leave to some developer that their specialty is, building and moving on. So that's our responsibility. And that's why I tilt towards the International Green Code. Now, we have to realize also that the effect, when we're down to recycling arena, 2 drawers, 2 bins in a drawer, that's pretty petty. I can tell you that, that to me is not such a huge deal as whether or not we'll have water and energy, which are interrelated, as Councilman Whitehead said. Waste and sustainability are ultra important to us. That's our obligation as government. That's why there are codes. Codes are approved by governments. They're not something you just blow by and say it doesn't exist because government would have overreach to it. Codes are a result of lives lost and exits being blocked or insufficient. That's why it evolved that way. Now we're up against the wall on energy, water, and these important issues. So, I believe that we can continue to discuss our positions. Councilwoman Whitehead, you've spoken. Councilman Durham, I think we're down to that clear set. I believe that it's time to give a nod. We can speak to our own positions again, but I think we need to now look at some specifics. I find some issues somewhat trivial. If it's down to whether or not there's 2 bins in an apartment and we're not even recycling it, just like somewhat frivolous to me. I don't understand that part of it. But for the sake of continued discussion, do you want to weigh in, or would you like to respond again, Councilwoman Whitehead?
Yeah, I just want to say
okay.
I would like to nod. I think I agree with Councilwoman Caputi. Let's give our nods on the different options, and I would give a nod to option B.
Yeah. Councilmember Milhaven?
Mr. Clack, can you you had a overhead you put on the Elmo at the end of your presentation that was sort of like option 2B, option B2, or right, where you were suggesting there was additional work, and you've said this several times tonight, that there's additional work to be done to dimension some of those things in B, and Mayor Durham made a similar comment about needing some additional information. So while I don't necessarily agree with option B, I think this direction sort of moves us forward and will give us the information folks feel they need, and we can then make those decisions at a future meeting based on the additional feedback.
Okay.
Does that sound agreeable to everybody?
So you're agreeable also with option B and with these stipulations?
Well, in as much as that's going to give us some additional information.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor said he needed more information. I would appreciate some more as well. So I think we're not making any final decisions here.
Right.
We're moving
Right.
down this path. We'll get more information to make decisions.
So I'm trying to weigh consensus here. Councilwoman Janik, and then
She's nodding.
Yeah, I'm okay with B, knowing that we pretty much agree with option B, which is, could you go back and show us option B from the beginning? Because it seems like if we had agreed to option B from the get-go, we would be going through this process anyways. Am I correct?
I think so, yeah.
Yes,
If we could go back to the
Yeah.
slide presentation. Yeah, there we go.
Yes, yeah, I'm fine with what Councilwoman Milhaven said.
Okay, Councilwoman Whitehead, and
I just want to make one slight change back to the overhead, and I think Councilwoman Milhaven agrees. I agree with all that. I really appreciate her. Just, I don't see any reason for Seek and Baba to meet again. So everything on that slide other than that item. And is there agreement from, okay, and Councilwoman Milhaven agrees with that? Yeah, I mean, they can. It's a free country.
They can if they
now,
want to.
now I'm going to clarify one thing that was spoken by Councilwoman Whitehead. I believe we said that the option for an electrical outlet for a stove or whatever is off the table. So I just want to clarify that we are, I am agreeing with that specifically, and that's one less, well, we're giving direction. I do want to bring in Vice Mayor Durham, and then go to Councilwoman Janik and Milhead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is Vice Mayor Durham. I'm generally in favor of option B, but as I said earlier, and as the mayor pointed out, option B contains some pretty trivial matters such as split waste baskets and so on. So I'm in favor of option B, but I would like to hear the best arguments against the individual items of option B in order to help me make a decision on each one individually. Thank you.
And then back to Councilwoman Janik.
I do want to also emphasize another aspect of why this is so important. Through conversations, there are other cities in this area that are waiting for Scottsdale to take the lead. They want these things to be mandatory, but they want us to take the lead because then it's easier for them to continue what we've started. So there is quite a bit of significance to Scottsdale being the best that it can be. Thank you.
Councilwoman Littlefield? Yes.
Councilwoman Janik just said basically what I was going to say. I think that I am in favor of option B. If they want to meet together and try to hash it out amongst themselves first, that's fine with me. Free country, talk it out, make it happen. But I do think that this is the way to go. And that I would wait and see what they come back with. I think that would be the best way to go. I am in favor of a lot of what the advisory commission said, and I think that some of what they want to do is good. Some of it, you know, if things change, I was just reading in one of my newsletters, actually yesterday, where they now come up with a car that can travel from one side of the country to the other on solar energy as it recharges itself as it goes along. So it may end up being that eventually we don't need these charging stations. We don't know what the future holds. There may be something coming up that we haven't even thought about yet, moonlight or something, you know? But what we can do is the best we can do right now at this point in time. As things change, as our economy changes, as our society changes, these get updated, these get changed, remodeled, fixed, and we move on. You know, I personally like having the 2 trash cans. I think it's great because it's so much easier to get the trash out. But that's me, you know. Do we need to mandate that in every house that's constructed in Scottsdale? I don't know. That's something else to talk about. But, you know, a lot of these things are pretty important, and they have a long-term extension in Scottsdale on what will happen in construction, what will happen in our current homes here. So I think it's worth spending some time on, and I think I like B. If they could get together and hash out some of these things behind closed doors, that's fine with me, and then come back with what they've come up with. If not, we'll come up with something when it comes back to us. So thank you.
So in closing, Mr. Clack, do you have enough direction to work with?
I think I do.
Right.
If I may summarize, It sounds like the council is considering likes option B, with the exception of the electrification amendment for gas appliances in new single-family residences. It doesn't sound like you're too warm on the pull-out recycling bins in the kitchens of single-family homes. And then we'll take a look at the energy code and the International Green Construction Code as mandatory. And it sounds like you're kind of leaving it up to us if we want to bring Seek and BABA together, but if we don't, there's no real heartburn. Do I have that right?
Yes, good. We have a lot of nods up here. And I do want to add, in the meantime, okay, Scottsdale has section 49.7, Article 7 on water conservation. So we will continue to probably supplement that. It's already in our ordinance, and how we can do that is very important as these new codes are adopted. At this point, we are concluded on our work study. Do I have a motion to adjourn? We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye and record your vote. We are adjourned.